Part 12. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 111. Huang Manting, if I remember correctly, she, the eldest young master of the Mu family, and yeah, you all came from Tianqian City, right? Looking at the woman walking down the steps of the high platform, the disciples of the sect couldn't help but discuss in a low voice. Tianqian City is a place with talented people. It's not surprising that there are several geniuses. Generally speaking, it's good to have one or two geniuses in a place, but the people from Tianqian City, whether it's Ya Lingxian, Ya Yu, or even Huang Manting, are all extremely talented. The reason is that Tianqian City is close to Lianji sect and has abundant spiritual energy, so even if you meditate and practice, it will be faster than other places. Everyone, even if you fail, you can still get some luck. Although it's not as good as the luck left by Senior Ling Long, it's better than nothing, right? Muzian said with a smile. The stone tablet just now was left by Ling Long to test the disciples of the sect and test whether they are qualified to obtain the inheritance of luck. And this process itself can gain some luck. When Muzian said this, the disappointment of many failed people was slightly relieved, and they also had a better impression of this strange sect disciple. At first, they would treat Ye Yu and Gong Sun Cheng's slander of Muzian coldly, just because Muzian had no relationship with them. But this time, Muzian's behavior made many people have a big change in his opinion of him. Of course, there will still be a few people who are jealous, and even suspect that Muzian has benefited from the inheritance of luck from Ling Long. But now that Muzian is present, he will not be denounced like just now. After all, if the other party is really on good terms with that Senior Ling Long, no matter how you think about it, it is more correct to be on good terms with him than to be his enemy. Whether those who hate Muzian in their hearts or those who are sincerely grateful to him, now know what to do. Muzian looked at Huang Manting, who was walking down the stairs, and glanced at the young lady for a few times. The other party seemed to have noticed it, and looked over. After staring at Muzian, she showed a very beautiful and charming smile. Then, the two of them tacitly withdrew their gazes. There were many people here, and if people knew that Muzian had just helped her cheat, things would be troublesome. Both of them were smart people and knew what to do. Did you help her secretly just now? At this time, Wei Mengru's voice suddenly came to Muzian's ears. Muzian smiled and glanced at the maid next to him, deliberately teasing, Sister Mengru is jealous. Don't worry, the 3 fortune inheritances given to me by Senior Ling Long are all for you. As for Huang Manting, I just helped her. Wei Mengru curled her lips and said disdainfully, I'm just asking. After a pause, she reminded him out of concern for the young master, Huang Manting's personality is different from ordinary people. If you don't pay attention, you may be confused by her one day and fall at her feet. I know my limits. Muzian smiled indifferently. A woman like Huang Manting is too possessive and she likes to teach others, so she is not suitable to be a lover. She is more suitable to play the role of friend. Besides, if there is really any special interest, wouldn't it be better to play with Sister Mengru after I win her over one day in the future? At that time, let her wear black and white silk on her legs respectively. Tisk, it's not okay to start looking forward to it now, you have to proceed step by step, Muzian sighed secretly. There's no other way, I'll go find Ruoxi to play with him in the evening. Looking at the disciples who came on stage one after another to test whether they were qualified to obtain the inheritance of luck, Muzian was thinking about such things in his heart. Master Mu, are you free to accompany Manting for a cup of tea in the evening? At this time, a clear and pleasant voice fell into Muzian's ears through the way of voice transmission. He glanced at the crowd and saw Huang Manting, who was surrounded by several people with her arms folded on her chest and a gentle smile. The black dress fits tightly against the extremely seductive and charming figure. At this time, it seems that she is talking with others with a smile, but a pair of charming eyes are staring straight at Muzian, which is extremely attractive. Let's do it another day. I have something to do during this period, Musian replied through voice transmission. His luck has not been very good during this period. The matter of Swilian has not been resolved yet. If people find out that he went to Huang Manding in the middle of the night, things will be troublesome. I have to calm down first. And now his mind is full of Biruoxi's cool look in that palace skirt, and he just wants to taste the beauty again tonight. As for Huang Manding, let's talk about it later. Sensing the cold eyes of the maid behind him, Musian explained in a voice transmission. I'm not interested in women, I just want to repay her a favor. What does it have to do with me? Wei Mengru replied indifferently. She paused and continued to ask, when did you owe her a favor? Didn't you promise Mr. Huang before that you and his daughter would take care of each other? He looked at Huang Manding's slender figure and smiled. Isn't this the best way to take care of her? First, repay the favor, and second, earn a good impression. Although Huang Manding's good impression is useless, it's a side effect anyway, so it's not a loss. Time passed silently, and one disciple after another came forward to test, but the last wisp of purple air still remained in the stone tablet. Wei Mengru glanced at Musian subconsciously, and for a moment she wondered if her young master was doing something behind the scenes again. But she quickly shook her head and rejected this guess. Musian didn't need to do this on purpose. The first luck was given to Huang Manding to repay a favor, and the second luck could be given to anyone as long as it didn't fall into Yayu's hands in the end. Seeing Yayu's confident look, Wei Mengru couldn't help but curl her lips secretly. Although the luck of this genius of the Ye family is strong, why is he so confident that he can get the luck inheritance? Everyone present is a genius, and no one is so confident. In the end, the second luck inheritance was obtained by a girl from the South Barbarians. This South Barbarian girl's dress is different from the sect disciples present. She wears a scarf on her head, a mole between her eyebrows, and a sweet smile on her face, which is quite exotic. Dongzhou and Nanmen are far apart, and their customs are different. This kind of dress may be quite novel to people in Dongzhou, but it is a very common makeup in Nanmen. Musian looked at the girl from Nanmen for a few times, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart, this small waist, must be very exciting to twist. However, it is quite rare that people from Nanmen would come to Lianji sect from afar. When Musian thought of this, he suddenly noticed a pair of eyes staring at him in the crowd. He looked up and saw that it was Yayu, who did not inherit the spiritual dragon luck. Musian didn't care about such a look, and he retracted his gaze lightly, shook his head and chuckled secretly. For the second luck, he only secretly made some moves when Yayu came on stage, and Musian did not interfere with the others. This girl from Nanmen got it by her own ability. In fact, this is normal. There is not only Yayu in this world. Yayu is just one of the geniuses with outstanding talent and luck. Yayu has the hope of inheriting Linglong's luck, and naturally others have hope too. But as long as Musian is here, no matter how outstanding Yayu's luck is, he can't get Linglong's luck. An hour passed unknowingly, and the sect disciples in the hall were teleported out of Linglong's cave one after another. Musian also left with a group of sect disciples. Lan Mulian had been waiting at the door for a long time, raised his hand and picked up a cloud to send these disciples away. After today, the disciples who got the luck inheritance from Linglong's cave will spread throughout the sect. And these two disciples who got the luck inheritance will also affect the selection of inner disciples in a few days. After all, if you can get the luck inheritance of Linglong, your future achievements will definitely not be low. Even the first seat of the 9 main peaks has to think carefully. Lan Mulian stepped on a cloud, leaving Musian with only a back figure that gave people infinite reverie. She tilted her head slightly, and said in a cold and pleasant voice, "The third prince of the Dagan dynasty reported to me and senior sister Yan not long ago that you cheated in the Cave Heaven mansion, which affected everyone's assessment. Is this true?" "How can this person not afford to snitch?" Musian said respectfully, Senior sister, you know me. If I really cheated, yeah, you and Gong Soon Cheng would have been thrown out of the cave heaven mansion by me. And that was Senior Linglong's cave heaven. How could I cheat under her nose? Lan Murian nodded silently, seeming to agree with Musian's words. It's a pity that I didn't get the inheritance of luck in the end. I'm a little sad, Musian said regretfully, hoping that senior sister would comfort him. Heh. Who would have thought that? Lan Murian smiled coldly and said, if the person that Senior Linglong was looking for was really you, how could you not get any benefit at all? She paused, changed her tone, and continued, if you get the inheritance of luck, it's also a good thing to be low-key. There are other royal nobles of the Dogon dynasty in the section. Although there are regulations that prohibit private fights between gangs, remember to keep a close eye on the people around you and don't let them get caught. Senior sister's meaning is very clear. The third prince has someone above him, but he won't deal with me openly in the sect. But if I get caught, it will be different. Senior sister treats me as her own, otherwise she wouldn't say such things. Musian sincerely thank you for your reminder. Lan Murian said lightly. By the way, why didn't I see Pavilion Master Yan? Musian suddenly asked. The charming woman just now clearly came with Lan Murian, but now I don't see her, which is really a bit strange. Senior brother Yihao just came and invited us to enjoy the 8 treasure crane together. Senior sister is leaving first. When Lan Murian said this, she saw that Musian was a little confused, and added, Yihao is the head of Kanghai Peak. Yihao, is he the one who came up with such a perverted sect assessment? Musian remembered this name. Senior sister, aren't you going? I've heard that the 8 treasure crane is a treasure among treasures. If you eat some, your cultivation will increase significantly, Musian asked. Lan Murian said casually, the 8 treasure crane has no effect on the peak of the spirit refining, and if senior sister Yan leaves, someone has to stay to see you off. Senior sister is so nice, Musian praised sincerely, and when he got the chance, he hugged senior sister's thigh and licked it for a while. Lan Murian nodded reservedly, although I don't care about the matter of Senior Linglong, it is of great importance to you. If you are free tomorrow, come to Lianji Peak to find me as soon as possible. Don't care? Why do I feel like you want me to tell you about the spirit dragon right now if I can? Musian complained in his heart. I know. I will rush to Lianji Peak as soon as possible tomorrow, Musian said. The two chatted for a while, and at this time, Lan Murian suddenly seemed to have sensed something and looked up behind Musian. Not far behind him, a silver-haired beauty was slowly floating here. She was dressed quite cleanly and simply, with a pair of red eyes without any impurities. Her hair was simply tied up with a ribbon, with strands of silver hair hanging down. She had an excellent figure and gave people a gentle and lovely feeling. And in her hand, she was holding a colorful crane. 8 treasure crane. Even Lan Murian couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, looking at the cute silver-haired woman, hesitating for a moment, and respectfully said, Senior. Senior Lin Ling. Musian followed with a respectful shout. Then, he looked at Lin Ling for a few times and asked in confusion, where is Sister Ling Xian? Lin Ling pointed to the cave under the cliff. Musian guessed, do you mean, she is still in the cave? Lin Ling nodded, looking quite cute and well behaved. At this time, Lan Murian suddenly hesitated and said, Senior, you are holding this 8 treasure crane in your hand, what are you going to do? The silver-haired beauty tilted her head slightly, looking like I don't understand what you are talking about, human language. Lan Murian smiled lightly and said, I know, since the senior is interested in the 8 treasure crane, I will go to Kanghai Peak to explain it later. In order to suppress the karmic fire, Senior Linglong has been in seclusion for many years. It's rare for him to come out this time. It's nothing to want to eat an 8 treasure crane. Even if the head of Kanghai Peak knew that an 8 treasure crane was caught by Linglong, he wouldn't mind. No matter how precious the 8 treasure crane is, it can't compare to the Ling Long. After chatting for a while, Musian said goodbye to Lan Murian and left with Wei Mengru. When he stepped on the flying sword, he always kept a safe distance from Wei Mengru, showing that he was not close to beauty. Lan Murian looked at the scene quietly, her expression was still cold. However, when she retracted her gaze, she suddenly found that Lin Ling, who was still beside her, had disappeared. Several snow-white feathers slowly fell from the sky. Normally, there should be flocks of 8 treasure cranes flying by at this time. Why didn't I see any today? Lan Murian's clear eyebrows revealed a trace of confusion. Then, she turned her head slightly and looked in the direction where Musian left. For some reason, she suddenly had a bad premonition in her heart. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 112. Wei Mengru stepped on the flying sword and flew to the Liuli Palace with Musian. At your feet is a bottomless cliff, surrounded by spiritual energy and mist. Musian put his arms around Wei Mengru's waist and pressed his chest against the maid's back. Wei Mengru glanced at him indifferently, but Musian didn't mind at all and explained, I'm a little afraid that I will fall. Wei Mengru immediately gave him a sneer. What is fear? Why weren't you afraid in front of Lan Murian just now? Don't you just want to maintain your image in front of that senior sister? Ha, man. She wanted to think about it, but Wei Mengru didn't say anything. After all, she was almost at the Liuli Palace. Under the leadership of Wei Mengru, Musian quickly returned to Liuli Palace. Not long after, the two of them entered Tianhe Garden together and saw Bairuoxi in the quiet and elegant pavilion. It was mid-autumn, but the birds were singing and the flowers were fragrant in this villa. The beauty with exquisite appearance was wearing a white palace dress that fit her personality. Her hair fell naturally and unadorned like a waterfall, with a strand of hair in front of her forehead resting on her face, adding a bit of lazy fireworks. You're not hurt, are you? Bairuoxi raised her head and stared at the young man with a slight smile on her face. It's okay. Although a lot of things happened in Senior Linglong's cave, private fighting is strictly prohibited, so it's not a big problem, Musian responded with a smile. Only then did Bairuoxi feel relieved. She called Musian and Wei Mengru to take their seats and said, just before you came back, news came from the third prince that you had betrayed your trust, abandoned the others, and harvested the luck of the spirit dragon on your own inheritance. She paused and said softly, what a disgusting guy. He is also a playboy. Why is there such a big difference? Do you mean that I am also a playboy? The problem is that I have completely changed my past and become a new person. Musian smiled, silently complaining in his heart, and decided to give Bairuoxi a little stick education tonight. Just listen to what the third prince has to say, no one will care. He took a sip of tea and smiled. Now those sect disciples have received more or less help from Musian, so why did the third prince spread rumors? In fact, it's quite good. After I practice meditation and am physically and mentally tired, I can still see the clowns performing in the circus. It's quite interesting to think about it. Did Mu Lang get the luck inheritance from Senior Linglong? Bairuoxi suddenly asked. Musian raised his hand and took out 3 palm-sized tokens from Naja. Each token contains a ray of purple energy. Bairuoxi looked up at Musian with a hint of surprise in her eyes, the aura of heaven. As one of the holders of the Qi of heaven, Bairuoxi naturally noticed the breath of Qi of heaven at the first glance. There is no doubt that these 3 tokens contain a ray of heavenly energy. Bairuoxi stared at the 3 palm-sized tokens. After a moment, she raised her eyes and said, although these 3 rays of heavenly energy are not much, they will be of great benefit to your future cultivation. I will protect you when the time comes, absorb it into your body. I don't need it. Musian shook his head gently. When the time comes, he will be able to obtain more heavenly energy from the spirit dragon. The 3 tokens are also mixed with the secrets of destiny inheritance. It would be too wasteful to consume them just to absorb the heavenly energy. Sister Mengru, try to absorb it into your body today. Musian handed one of the tokens to Wei Mengru. Wei Mengru took the token silently, and immediately raised her eyes to look at him, only to see a bright smile on his face, and continued, "If one is not enough, tell me again." Wei Mengru hesitated for a moment, and finally opened her lips slightly and said softly, "Thank you." Although she knew that her young master would often secretly look at her body with strange eyes, Wei Mengru still found it difficult to refuse Musian's kindness. Because she could clearly feel the young master's sincerity. Although he seems to be sincere towards other girls. Bairuoxi watched the conversation between the master and the slave, silently picked up the tea and took a sip without speaking. At this time, she suddenly noticed that Musian was staring at her intensely at some point. Her eyelashes could not help but tremble slightly. She lowered her eyes slightly and said shyly and in a low voice, "What's the matter? Why does Mu Lang keep staring at me?" Musian stretched out his hand across the table and gently placed it on the back of Bairuoxi's hand. "Ruoxi, I miss you so much during this time away. You've only been away for less than half a day." Bairuoxi glanced at him and said quietly. "Not seeing you for one day is like 3 autumns. To put it another way, we haven't seen you for half a day. It's normal to miss you." Musian stared at Bairuoxi's pretty face. Under the sun, her face was as warm as a piece of flawless jade. Although she was a classical beauty with a cool temperament, when facing her lover, her peach-like eyes were covered with sparkling mist, making her charming and alluring. The word beautiful and delicious can be perfectly reflected at this moment. If she puts on modern clothes, Bairuoxi is probably an unattainable beauty from a prestigious school in the eyes of everyone. She has long hair and is wearing a simple t-shirt and white pleated skirt, revealing a pair of straight legs. There are probably 2 bulges in front of the t-shirt. A bulging chest. Wei Mengru glanced at Musian coldly, her eyes full of disgust. "Well, Sister Mengru is really the best at looking at me with this disdainful look at a scumbag." Musian enjoyed Wei Mengru's disdainful look full of disgust, but she held Bairuoxi's soft little hand. Realizing that Wei Mengru stood up and left gracefully the next moment, Musian simply sat next to Bairuoxi and stared at her face. Her beautiful white jawline, her upturned nose, and her seductive cherry lips were slightly pursed, because the tea just now had a little more moist luster. Musian put his hands on her shoulders and lowered his head slightly, wanting to taste the remaining tea on Bairuoxi's lips. Bairuoxi was a little shy, and tried to gently push Musian away, whispering, "Don't do this in the yard." "Don't worry, no outsiders will come in." Musian slowly approached the lips of the cold beauty and was about to taste it. At this time, he suddenly felt a breeze blowing by his side, and there seemed to be a slightly familiar breath beside him. Musian subconsciously turned his head and saw Miss Linglong wearing a loose plain robe, completely hiding her beautiful figure. She stood beside Musian, holding a crane in her hand, letting it flap its wings, but it still couldn't escape her claws. "Senior Linling," Musian hesitated for a moment and said, "Why are you here?" Linling pointed to the words on the table. "You continue," she wrote on the table. "I can wait for you," she added. The two looked at each other. Bairuoxi quickly broke free from Musian's arms, gently combed the hair in front of her forehead, and maintained her usual reserved and coldness. Then she turned her head to look at Musian as if nothing had happened, trying to maintain her previous image, and smiled. "Mu Lang, who is she?" She deliberately emphasized the word again. "This is Senior Linglong." Musian transmitted the message. "Linglong, a powerful being that has existed since the founding of Lianji sect, how could he be here?" Bairuoxi's eyes flickered slightly, and when she looked at the silver-haired and red-eyed queen again, her eyes became much more respectful, and she said, "Hello, Senior." The tone was respectful, but at the same time it would not give people a feeling of flattery. This was also one of the ways Bai Ruoxi learned to behave in the Bai family in the past. But she obviously didn't know that the senior didn't care about these things at all. "Senior, what are you doing here?" Musian asked in confusion. Linling picked up the tied-up 8 treasure crane and put it on the table. 8 treasure crane, Musian's eyes condensed slightly. Eating a little of this thing can improve one's cultivation. It has an effect before the peak of the soul refining, and there are no side effects. According to the previous explanation of the senior sister, this kind of crane is only raised by the head of Kanghai Peak, and it is very precious. Linling wrote on the table, "Take it and stew it, and enjoy it together in the evening." Musian said in embarrassment, "Senior Linling, if you eat this 8 treasure crane, the head of Kanghai Peak may not say anything, but if we eat it, I'm afraid." Linling tilted her head slightly, with doubt in her eyes, and asked, Is she asking me why?" Musian understood her meaning magically, and said, "The 8 treasure crane is raised by the head of Kanghai Peak. He rarely eats it himself, and it is mostly used to reward disciples of the sect with outstanding performance." Musian continued, "Such a treasure, even Kanghai Peak may only have a few. It's not appropriate for me to eat this 8 treasure crane." Who knew that at this time? Linling shook her head with a serious face, as if she wanted to say something. Then, under Musian's gaze, she raised her finger, and in an instant, from the ring on her finger, she threw out another 8 treasure crane that was tied up and half the size of a person. Then, she flicked her right hand gently, and a dozen 8 treasure cranes poured out of the ring one after another. Each of them had its wings tied up, unable to move, and could only make wailing sounds. They looked so pitiful, but the sound was so beautiful. They must be delicious to eat. Musian was quite greedy. He glanced at the words that appeared on the table. "There are a total of 17, you won't be caught if you steal 1 or 2. So sister, do you know that this is stealing?" Musian looked at Linling's bright and clear red eyes in silence. This Linling is very similar to Musian in some ways. Musian caught Yayu, the sheep, and sheared his wool every now and then. And this Linling was more cruel than Musian, and ran away with the sheep openly. Musian silently looked at the silver-haired beauty in front of him. She was holding a 8 treasure crane in her hand, with a green garden in the background. She was wearing a plain loose robe, but it was hard to hide her beautiful face. "If this makes you unhappy, I can let them go," Linglong wrote on the table again. Musian looked at the words on the table, and for some reason, he felt that he understood her thoughts. Senior Linling didn't catch so many 8 treasure cranes just because she wanted to eat them. It was probably because she cared about the younger generation that she brought them to him to share. This woman may have lived for tens of thousands of years, but her mind is as simple as a child. However, they definitely can't eat this 8 treasure crane. But they can sell it as a good favor. Linglong's starting point is good. After all, in her opinion, transferring her own luck to Musian is a profit, so she wants to compensate Musian. Of course, it's probably because she wants to eat it herself. However, Linglong eats this 8 treasure crane, and the head will not say anything, nor dare to say anything. But if they eat, even if the head of Kanghai Peak doesn't say anything for the sake of Linglong, he will feel uncomfortable. However, even if he can't eat it, he can still do a big favor. "If you don't mind, please sit in our villa for a while." Musian glanced at the desperate 8 treasure crane in Linling's hand and smiled. "I will deal with this 8 treasure crane later and let you enjoy it. Then, just wait for the head of Kanghai Peak to arrive." Kanghai Peak. In an air pavilion at the top of the peak, 4 or 5 people gathered together. There was a pot of wine on the table, and the leader was the current head of Kanghai Peak, Yi Hao. Next to him were the head of the medicinal food pavilion, Yi Huayun, and the head of the library pavilion, Yan Ruyu. In addition, there were 2 monks who were invited by Yi Hao to taste the 8 treasure crane together. "Brother, you seem to be in a good mood today. You even invited us to enjoy the 8 treasure crane. Did something good happen? Yan Ruyu asked with a smile. Her temperament was as ethereal as an immortal. Yi Huayun raised his wine glass and took a sip of soju, and said with a smile, I think brother is in such a good mood, probably because of the sect assessment of Kanghai Peak 2 days ago. The junior brother next to him said, Kanghai Peak has not had so many assessment disciples pass for a long time, but this time almost all passed, and each of them has a very good talent, which is really worth celebrating. Yan Ruyu played with the wine glass in his hand, squinted and smiled, that Musian is indeed quite capable. Yi Hao smiled and nodded, being able to comprehend the formation left by the master, even if it is just a little bit of fur, this talent is already quite amazing. In that case, Brother Yi plans to choose him as the inner disciple this time, Yan Ruyu asked. Don't worry, observe it again. Yi Hao shook his head and smiled. One inner disciple per main peak, you have to make a careful decision. Yi Huayun followed up. There are many talented disciples this time. If you choose an inner disciple, I will probably give him an 8 treasure crane as a gift. Yi Hao laughed, thinking that he was in a very good mood. 8 treasure cranes, if you take one before the peak of the soul training, you can at least jump 1 grade. If you are in the chi training realm, the effect is even better. Not only the disciples of the sect, but also many pavilion masters in the sect are greedy for 8 treasure cranes. However, no one dared to steal them so far. After all, Yi Hao spent countless rare medicinal materials to raise these 8 treasure cranes, and the relationship of more than 10 years is here, no one dares to challenge his bottom line. By the way, didn't junior sister Lan say when she just came that senior Linglong took away an 8 treasure crane? Senior brother, don't you go to her to ask for an explanation, Yan Ruyu teased. Yi Hao smiled indifferently, since she is senior Linglong, let alone one, if she wants, it doesn't matter if all the 8 treasure cranes are given to her. This is the pattern. The spirit dragon is the guardian beast of the section. In the past, it had fought against the demons together with the sect master. One word could destroy the enemy. For such a creature, it would be nothing even if more than a dozen 8 treasure cranes were sent out. Of course, it is not necessarily so generous when it comes to doing so. After all, who can't say something nice, everyone present understands, but it is not enough to expose it. After a while of chatting, Yan Ruyu looked up at the dusk and suddenly doubted, by the way, don't those 8 treasure cranes usually fly back at the hour of the twilight? Why haven't they been seen so late today? Yi Hao looked up at the empty sky, frowned slightly, and felt something was wrong in his heart. At this time, Yi Hao suddenly seemed to have a feeling, and looked up at a lightly flying paper crane not far away. He raised his hand and grabbed it, and the paper crane turned into a piece of letter paper and fell into his hand. Several people looked at him subconsciously. Yi Hao took a look and said, a letter from Musian. Then, he looked at the contents of the letter, and in an instant, all the junior brothers and sisters saw that the indifferent smile on the face of the headmaster just now was completely frozen. After a long time, Yi Hao came back to his senses. He slowly exhaled a breath of turbid air and said in a deep voice, I have to go to the glazed palace. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 113. Musian waited in the villa for a while, and soon saw a handsome man flying in the distance. He was wearing a white robe, smiling, and looked very elegant. Who is this guy? He looks pretty good, but his appearance is probably just a little worse than mine. Musian looked at the man. Yi Hao bowed politely, without any airs of an elder, and said with a smile, Friend Mu, you wrote me a letter in front, right? Is this man Yi Hao? The heads of the major peaks are probably over 100 years old, and as for their strength, they are at least in the return to Void Realm. Musian was immediately very respectful, and said with a fist, Junior Musian, I meet you, Senior. His attitude seemed sincere and respectful. Yihao smiled and nodded, saying, I read your letter, I heard that Senior Linglong is with you now. Musian said respectfully, yes, Senior Linglong just ate an 8 treasure crane not long ago. Yihao's eyelids twitched slightly, but he still had a faint smile on his face, and nodded, it's okay, since she is Senior Linglong, let her eat whatever she wants. Having said that, if you don't care, why did you come to me? Musian said. Senior Linglong only caught the 8 treasure crane because he had never eaten it before, but this 8 treasure crane is so's existence, it has no effect. Yihao nodded slightly and said with a smile, little friend Mu, what do you think? Musian pondered for a moment and said slowly, it is a bit of a waste of food to eat the 8 treasure crane in this way, so the junior also persuaded Senior Linglong, but... Musian hesitated for a moment and continued, but please rest assured, Senior, I will think of a way in the next few days. In fact, after Linglong ate an 8 treasure crane, he felt that the taste was not as good as he imagined, and he lost interest in other 8 treasure cranes. So when Musian asked for it just now, he planned to give it to him without any hesitation. It's just that Musian didn't accept it. After all, if all the 8 treasure cranes were taken back from Linglong so easily, this favor would not be so impressive. Yihao's expression eased a little, and he nodded and said, little friend Mu, then I'll trouble you for this matter. With his identity, it is not suitable to ask Linglong for the 8 treasure crane. After all, if this matter were to be spread out, it would not be glorious. Not long ago, he said in front of his junior brothers and sisters that it's okay to give all the 8 treasure cranes to Senior Linglong. If he goes to ask for them back now, how can he survive in the sect after it is spread out? Besides, if Linglong doesn't give it to him, Yihao really has no way to deal with it. If the other party is Linglong, even if the sect master comes forward, it may not work. Therefore, the head of Kanghai Peak can only pin his hopes on Musian. By the way, why is Senior Linglong here with you? Yihao suddenly remembered this important thing. Linglong rarely comes out of retreat, and has never been close to anyone except the sect master, but now he is in the residence of the sect disciple who has just joined the sect not long ago, which is really incredible. Musian was a little worried when he heard this, and sighed, in fact, when I entered Senior Linglong's cave, I happened to meet her. We had a good chat and got along well. I also inherited her luck. Oh. Yihao looked at the seemingly honest and docile boy for a few times and said, isn't this a good thing? Why is Mu sighing? This is a good thing, but I never thought that after leaving the cave, I would find that the third prince falsely accused me of abandoning my companions and being a treacherous person. When Musian said this, he sighed softly, and his face seemed a little heavy. The third prince. Yihao thought for a moment and said to himself, the offspring of that old man in the Dogon dynasty, humph, the royal family will do this kind of conspiracy. After that, he looked at Musian and said, don't worry, my friend Mu, if someone takes this opportunity to make trouble, the sect will guarantee absolute fairness. Senior, your righteousness makes me admire you, so I will thank you first. Musian was immediately overjoyed and clasped his fists respectfully. Yihao nodded slightly, and before leaving, he reminded him intentionally or unintentionally, the 8 treasure crane has no effect on cultivators after the peak of the spirit refining. If Senior Linglong wants to eat, I will send some other ingredients tomorrow. As for the 8 treasure crane, if you can get it back, I will give you one. Leave this matter to the juniors, Musian vowed. Yihao nodded with a smile, and was quite satisfied with Musian's understanding. He said a few more words, which were roughly words to encourage Musian to practice hard, and then he left. Musian clasped his fists respectfully and watched Yihao walk away. Then he retracted his gaze, stretched his waist, and returned to the room, where he saw Lin Ling sitting in the room, holding her cheeks with her hands and seemed to be in a daze. She sat in the room, her silver hair was scattered, and the candlelight covered her delicate face with a layer of warm luster. Her towering chest rested on the table. Although her graceful figure was covered by a loose plain robe, it was full of abstinence. "Senior Lin Ling, we will return the 8 treasure cranes to the head in 2 days. Is that okay?" Musian quickly gathered his thoughts and asked softly. Even though he had asked once before, it was better to confirm it again just in case the other party regretted it. Lin Ling came back to reality from her daze, glanced at him, and nodded gently. In the past, in order to suppress the fire of karma, Lin Ling had never been born. This time, with the help of someone, she was able to leave her cave in human form for the time being, and naturally wanted to taste all kinds of delicacies. 8 treasure crane, after eating one, she lost interest. "When will the exchange of luck begin?" Musian asked again. "Dong dong." Lin Ling knocked on the table and wrote something on it. Musian nodded and looked. "After the selection of inner disciples is over. It takes a little time to prepare for the transfer of luck. Even Linglong needs some preparation rituals, and the transfer of luck also requires a long process, not a day or two." Musian smiled and nodded, and continued to chat with Linglong for a while, and left the room after getting close to him. He did not return to his room immediately, but walked along the corridor to Bairuoxi's room. When he quietly opened the door, he only saw Bairuoxi lying in the quilt, looking like he was resting. But it was obvious that this was just an illusion. After all, cultivators in the refining spirit realm did not need to rest at all. Besides, it was only a short time ago. How could Bairuoxi go to bed so early? Musian closed the door, took off his robe, got into the quilt, and hugged Bairuoxi's soft body. Another night of fighting for Bairuoxi's cultivation, boring. That night. At this moment, in a side hall, the handsome third prince Ning Long, who had 2 dark circles under his eyes, tapped the edge of the chair with his fingertips, looking gloomy. In front of him, 2 cultivators of the same age stood respectfully in front of him. Generally speaking, the rule of a dynasty does not exceed 300 years at most, but in this world, the rule of the Dogon dynasty over Dongzhou has been nearly 1,000 years. It had reached its peak in the past 100 years, but in the past 10 years, there seemed to be some signs of decline. But even so, the foundation of the Dogon dynasty still exists. In the past, many royal children entered the Lianji sect to practice, and even climbed to the top step by step. After the third prince entered the sect, he also received some special treatment. For example, these 2 cultivators were sent by the deputy chief of Huabao Peak to solve some daily troubles for the third prince. "You mean," Musian took the people who participated in the Linglong assessment to the place where the luck was inherited. The third prince looked up and stared at the 2 people, his face was terribly gloomy, and he regretted it in his heart. It's no wonder, he is the third prince of the Dogon dynasty, born with purple chi coming from the east. If he can inherit the luck of the Linglong this time, he may be able to become the prince in the future with the luck of the Linglong. After all, the luck brought by the Linglong, which represents the word luck, even the father has to consider it carefully. As a result, he was driven out not long after entering the spirit dragon's cave. If he hadn't asked for this, but had stayed dormant honestly, he might have followed Musian to find the location of the luck inheritance, and even obtain the spirit dragon's luck. And all this was attributed to his over-impulsiveness, but also because of Musian. If he hadn't cheated, how could he have questioned the spirit dragon because he felt it was unfair? It is said that the 2 people who got the luck inheritance are Huang Manting and the other is a girl from the southern barbarians. A cultivator beside him said respectfully. In the same Lianji sect, even the identity of the third prince is not so intimidating, but he has the deputy chief of Huabao Peak behind him. That's completely different. It's a rare thing to be able to work for the deputy chief. If he gets the favor of the deputy chief in the future, he may be able to get some resources from Huabao Peak. This is quite tempting. Are you sure that Musian also got the luck? Asked the third prince. It's not certain for now, at least we can't tell anything from the surface, the cultivator next to him answered immediately. By the way, I heard from the sect disciples that when Senior Linglong left the cliff for the first time, he seemed to have approached Bairuoxi on his own initiative, and Musian was also there at the time. Another cultivator reported the intelligence he had collected in the past 2 days. Oh! The third prince narrowed his eyes slightly, tapping the edge of the chair with his fingertips. After a long time, a blue lightning flashed through his mind, and he suddenly thought of a possibility. What if Linglong was not looking for Bairuoxi, but Musian? If so, it would explain why Linglong was with Musian when he was in the cave, and even seemed to have a good relationship with him. Because from the beginning, Linglong was looking for Musian, and Bairuoxi was just a cover. Musian must have some secrets. The third prince said firmly, you continue to investigate. After the inner disciple selection ceremony is over, I want to see Musian's past experiences. Both disciples said yes. Watching the two turn around and leave, the third prince picked up the tea and took a sip, but his mind was full of thoughts. At the same time, on the other side. Are you very unconvinced? An old voice also sounded slowly in Yayu's heart, as if he had noticed Yayu's inner irritability at the moment. My talent and even my luck are stronger than his. Why did the spirit dragon choose him instead of me? Yayu roared in his heart with reluctance, and his breath was a little disordered. The old man sighed, luck only increases your chances of getting a chance, but being able to seize the opportunity depends on your ability. Teacher, do you mean my ability is not as good as Musian? Yayu was quite dissatisfied. Your ability is not worse than his, and even much stronger than Musian, the old voice said faintly, but you don't know how to adapt. In the world of immortals, strength is one aspect, and it is equally important to know how to adapt when dealing with people. Imagine that even if you are now at the peak of Qi refining or even refining God, and can defeat Musian in terms of strength, what if he calls other people to help? The old man's words directly left Yayu speechless. Then, Yayu immediately shook his head and said, no, relying on external forces is ultimately a crooked path. But you have been defeated by external forces several times. Bairuoxi was your ex-fiancé, and Ye Lingxian and Ye Qian were also your sisters, but now, they are all on Musian's side. Aren't these all external forces? The old man sighed secretly, but did not speak again to guide Yayu. The next morning, Musian left the room early and followed Wei Mengru to Lianji Peak. Write the paper crane and throw it into Lianji Peak. Not long after, you can see Lan Murian riding a cloud to Musian. She looked at Musian, who was keeping a safe distance from Wei Mengru, smiling, and said, you came quite early. Come in first, I have made hot tea for you too. After that, she took Musian and Wei Mengru to the courtyard pavilion in the back mountain. Along the way, Musian looked around and suddenly asked, Sister, isn't it rumored that the leader of Lianji sect lives here? Why haven't I seen her? Master left 2 days ago and I don't know where he went, Lan Murian replied. Is that so? Musian was a little disappointed. He also wanted to take this opportunity to see what his pen pal looked like. The three of them came to the front of the pavilion unknowingly, but Wei Mengru did not sit down, but left temporarily. Sister Mengru's personality is like this, sister, don't worry about it, Musian smiled. Lan Murian nodded slightly, raised her white hands, and poured hot tea for him. It is said that the head of Kanghai Peak went to Liulai Palace to find you yesterday, her clear and cold voice sounded, and she went straight to one of the key points as soon as she opened her mouth. Musian nodded slightly and said, Senior Linglong captured the 8 treasures crane yesterday, so Senior Yi was alarmed. Just because of an 8 treasures crane, Lan Murian raised her eyes slightly. In my impression, Senior Brother Yi is not such a stingy person. Senior Linglong captured all the 8 treasure cranes yesterday. Muzian told the truth. All the 8 treasure cranes. Lan Murian's eyes showed a hint of surprise. No wonder senior brother Yi went to the glazed palace on purpose. If it was just 1 treasure crane, it would be fine, but more than a dozen were captured. That really makes people care. Lan Murian picked up the teacup and suddenly realized that Muzian was looking straight at her, as if he was expecting her to lift her veil. A faint arc appeared at the corner of her mouth. She put down the teacup calmly and smiled faintly. Mr. Mu, you said that Senior Linglong was looking for you before. What's the reason? Why do you want to take off your clothes and not take them off? Aren't you deceiving my feelings? Muzian felt a little regretful in his heart, but he concealed it well. He took a sip of tea and said, Senior sister, do you still remember the luck I tested on the test monument that day? Lan Murian was a very smart woman. Hearing this, she immediately guessed something and said, Senior Linglong is interested in your luck, she even knows what your luck represents. As expected of a senior sister, she is really smart and understands it at once. Muzian nodded slightly and said, Senior sister guessed basically correctly. Senior Linglong came to me because of my luck. He even gave me the inheritance of luck directly in the cave. After speaking, Muzian spread out his palm and took out 2 tokens. The token containing Linglong's luck. Lan Murian seemed a little surprised. Muzian nodded slightly, and then immediately said, if you need it, you can take one. Lan Murian shook her head gently, although Senior Linglong's luck is precious, it has no effect on me. No effect, that means senior sister is also a person with great luck, and her luck has reached the top. Muzian understood it in his heart. At this time, he suddenly noticed a cold gaze staring at him coldly. When he looked up, he found that Lan Murian smiled and said, Mr. Mu is really smart. He actually tricked me. Although the voice was cold and pleasant, and even with a smile on his face, there was no smile in his eyes. Muzian said respectfully, I just want to help senior sister out of kindness. Then, like before, give 1 token to Ye Lingxian, 1 to Ye Qian, and 1 to your little lover. Lan Murian changed her tone and said faintly, just like giving Suilian before. The crisp and pleasant voice suddenly turned from soft to cold. Muzian's heart trembled. Although Lan Murian never mentioned the matter of Suilian, she was indeed concerned about it. Muzian said helplessly, Senior sister, if, Miss Bai was extremely uneasy because of the suppression of her family when she was in Tianqian City. In addition, you had previously identified her as a demon cultivator, which also made her even more worried. Self-abasement. If the person I chose at that time was not her, I would be worried. Muzian sighed softly, put down the teacup gently, shook his head and sighed, that's all, I know no matter how much I say, it's just an excuse. I'm very satisfied that senior sister is willing to see me today. He paused, looked up at Lan Murian, who maintained a cold image, and said, Senior sister, what happened to Suilian is indeed my fault. I will admit it if you want to scold or punish me, but I only hope that I can still do it in the future. See senior sister. He took out dozens of paper cranes from the ring, lowered his eyes, looked at the paper cranes, and said softly, I want to continue sending messages to senior sister's Hai He in the future. When he said this, there was no sound from Lan Murian. But Muzian always lowered his eyes and never raised his head. This senior sister is so smart, no matter how affectionate Muzian behaves, she still remains rational and skeptical of his words. Lan Murian looked at Muzian with a slight smile, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and said with a slight smile, young Master Mu is really good at making people happy. Everything I say is true, senior sister, Muzian said sincerely. After another moment of silence, Lan Murian said quietly, put away those paper cranes first. If master happens to see them, it will be troublesome. When Muzian heard this, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Lan Mulian's words also meant that Swilian's matter was temporarily over. Although this does not mean that the other party will not care about this matter from now on, but at least he can harass the senior sister every now and then. As long as the other person is willing to talk to him, he can always develop feelings slowly. By the way, senior sister is the leader of Kanghai Peak, very proficient in formations. After the two chatted for a few more words, Musian asked a question that he cared more about. The first of Kanghai Peak. Lan Mulian frowned slightly, thought for a moment, shook his head and said, "Senior brother Yi is better at talismans than formations." "Why are you asking this suddenly?" "When I was in the Forest of Trials before, I had the opportunity to understand a little bit about that formation, but I still didn't understand it, so I asked out of curiosity," Musian said. Lan Mulian pondered for a moment and said, "If you are interested in the battle method, you can go to the library and ask senior sister Yan. She knows the books in the library the best and can provide you with a lot of help." She paused and continued, "Perhaps if you enter Kanghai Peak in the future and are lucky enough to meet senior brother Yi's master, you can also get the answer." Musian was stunned. "Isn't senior brother Yi the leader? There is a master above him." Lan Mulian nodded slightly. Senior brother Yi's master was the first leader of Kanghai Peak. He was extremely powerful. Later, due to long-term seclusion, he handed over the management of Kanghai Peak to senior brother Yi. One word flashed through Musian's mind first. 25 boys in the demon world. The formation at Kanghai Peak was obviously set up by a certain demon cultivator, so he, a young monk who had received a certain mark from the queen of the demon realm, could understand that formation. Before, Musian was still doubting whether the demon cultivator at Kanghai Peak was Yi Hao, but now it seems that Yi Hao's master is more suspicious. After all, according to Lan Mulian, Yi Hao is not good at formations. However, if you want to meet senior brother Yi's master, you must at least have the opportunity to become an inner disciple. Lan Mulian's voice brought Musian back to reality. She played with the teacup in her hand, glanced at Musian, and said with a smile, "You should prepare for the selection of inner disciples in 4 days. At that time, the sect leader will also appear." Lan Mulian spoke again. "Will the sect master also come? Does this also mean that I can see the pen pal who seems to have written me letters to amuse me?" Thinking about such things, Musian finished his tea absent-mindedly, and then continued talking to Lan Mulian until half an hour later before he stood up and left. In the next 4 days, Musian no longer ran around, but concentrated on meditating in Bairuoxi's room. 4 days passed in a blink of an eye. On this day, in front of the pilgrimage hall, the 9 chiefs, 13 elders, 26 deputy chiefs and the chiefs of the major pavilions all stood in front of the high platform of the pilgrimage hall. This kind of combat power is the top existence in the entire Dongzhou and even the Xiangxia world. In front of the square of the cathedral temple, thousands of sect disciples stood upright, raising their heads with burning eyes, looking at the dozens of monks in front of the high platform, with fanatical admiration in their eyes. And the opening ceremony of the sect also officially kicked off. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 114. At this moment, on the high platform, an old man stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the sect disciples below the stage. Not far ahead, a middle-aged man in white was talking about various matters of Lianji sect, and encouraging the disciples to practice hard in the future. This batch of disciples who joined the sect seems to be the best batch in the past 10 years. Yan Ruyu smiled, glanced at the disciples below the stage, and chuckled. In terms of talent, it is indeed true. The elder stroked his beard and looked at the disciples below the stage, and said with a smile. The eldest lady of the Bai family in Tianqian City, the maid of the Mu family, and the demon girl of the Don Chamber of Commerce are not bad. In addition, the little girl from Nanman is pretty good. Another crisp, sweet, and pleasant voice came from the side. Have you forgotten the girl from the Ye family? If I remember correctly, the old man in the restricted area brought his daughter to Lianji sect a few years ago. Anyway, I want Bai Ruoxi at Daofeng, a woman in a cotton and linen dress said with a smile. Her face made the surrounding scenery seem to be eclipsed. There was a red dot between her eyebrows and a faint smile on her face. She was both unattainable and cold, but also charming. There are 15 people who can become inner disciples this time. To select nearly half of the disciples from them, to be honest, it's really a bit difficult to decide. Xiang Yan, the head of Chunyang Peak, looked at the elder not far in front of him and smiled. Elder, if there is a disciple you like, can you make an exception and choose one more person this time? Chunyang Peak is not qualified to select 2 inner disciples, right? The head of the side couldn't help but laugh. The final winner of the last sect competition was Wanhua Peak, and the runner-up was Ziwimeng Peak. Only these 2 main peaks can make an exception and select 2 inner disciples. This time, the selection of inner disciples will be first selected by the 2 main peaks that won the last sect competition, and then it will be the turn of other main peaks. Xiang Yan had a hot temper and almost yelled in anger. Wanhua Peak cultivates the way of spiritual energy absorption, and relies on delaying tactics to delay the spiritual energy of other disciples. What kind of ability is that? Brother, don't be so excited. Today is the opening ceremony of the sect, and the disciples below are still watching. The head of Wanhua Peak is a beautiful woman with a lingering charm. At this moment, she smiled and spoke gently. Although the smile is gentle and pleasant, those who know her well know that this woman is not as gentle as she appears on the surface. The elder smiled and said, "There is no rush to select inner disciples. We can do it slowly after the opening ceremony." At this time, someone suddenly said, "The sect master is here." Everyone looked up, but they didn't see the sect master mentioned by the elder. Then in the next moment, a woman in a plain robe appeared and sat in the last seat. "Sect master," everyone spoke up, looking at the sect master Shang Yanfei with respect. "The sect master is late, is there something wrong?" the elder asked in a low voice. "Don't worry, I just went to see an old friend and wasted some time." Shang Yanfei smiled indifferently, and her gorgeous eyes casually glanced at the sect disciples below the stage. Then, she wiped the oil stains from the corners of her mouth with her fingertips. Yi Hao suddenly hesitated, and couldn't help but look at Shang Yanfei twice more. Why do I feel that the sect master has the spirit of the 8 treasure crane? It shouldn't be that. This is the sect master. Could he steal my 8 treasure crane? Yi Hao quickly shook his head and dispelled those disrespectful thoughts in his mind. At this time, Daofeng's chief suddenly looked at Yan Ruyu with a smile and said, "By the way, junior sister, why do I remember that you have been in the 3rd level of Return to Void for a long time, and there is no sign of breakthrough?" Yan Ruyu frowned slightly when she heard it, but smiled brightly. "I am still young, and it doesn't matter if I get stuck in the bottleneck period for a few more years. But if I remember correctly, senior sister has been in the 5th level of Return to Void for nearly 10 years, right? At your current age, you have to pay attention," Yan Ruyu reminded, intentionally or unintentionally. "Don't stay in the 5th level of Return to Void until you die without breaking through." Although the smile was gentle, the words she said were extremely poisonous. It's no wonder. Yan Ruyu and Daofeng's chief were sisters from the same section. They didn't get along well with each other. Later, the first chief of Daofeng passed away and passed the position to the current chief of Daofeng. Yan Ruyu left Daofeng. The Lianji sect is huge. People basically don't see each other on weekdays, but when they met this time, there would inevitably be some small friction. However, Yan Ruyu's words just now hit the sore spot of many people present. These people are easily famous in the world of immortals, but they are not so rare on this platform. Moreover, many people have been stuck in their respective bottlenecks for a long time. It's not that they are lazy and don't practice, but the road of cultivation becomes more and more difficult as time goes on, especially when facing bottlenecks. Yan Ruyu's wave of AoE directly made the high-level people of the Lianji sect feel a little uncomfortable. It's rare for the sect master to come out of retreat. There are so many disciples watching from the stage. You should all stop it. The second elder had no choice but to stop the two. After the second elder's scolding, the two finally calmed down. Concubine Shangyan casually glanced at the leaders and even the elders beside her. Are so many people stuck in the bottleneck period? She seemed to have thought of something and glanced at the crowd in the audience casually. To be precise, he was Musian among the crowd. If these people were to know about the other cauldron in Musian's body, there would probably be another Musian in the topic of inner disciples just now. It doesn't matter if they are male monks, but among the people present, there are quite a few female monks. Although it is not good to attack a junior, if you can break through the bottleneck, most people will be tempted. At the same time, all the disciples in the audience also raised their heads and looked at the woman on the high platform. Even though her clothes are quite simple, her temperament alone is enough to attract people's attention. Musian also looked at the gorgeous woman with disheveled hair on the stage. Although it wasn't very clear from the audience, just the vague figure of this woman was enough to arouse the imagination of others. This girl is destined to me, Musian sighed inwardly. Just when he thought of this, concubine Shangyan on the stage suddenly seemed to feel something and looked over intentionally or unintentionally. Then in the next moment, the two people's eyes seemed to be locked together. Concubine Shangyan's lips curved inadvertently, looking at him with a half-smile. Musian's mind went blank for a moment, and it took a while before he came back to his senses. Damn it, why do I feel like my underwear has been seen through? Musian immediately withdrew his gaze, lowered his head, and maintained a respectful attitude. This is indeed a great white shark. I can't afford to keep such a terrifying creature in my fish pond for the time being. What's wrong? Wei Mengru obviously noticed something unusual about her young master and immediately sent a message to ask. Musian shook his head gently. It's okay, I probably didn't sleep well last night, and I'm a little tired now. Wei Mengru immediately gave him a sideways look and said calmly, who asked you to have sex with Miss Bai the night before? She did not continue, but looked at Musian with eyes full of contempt. Musian naturally didn't care about this, and glanced at Bai Ruoxi, who had a graceful figure among the disciples of the sect not far away. Then his eyes fell on Ye Qian, who was wearing a light blue skirt behind Bai Ruoxi and looked pure and charming. Normally Ye Qian basically follows Ye Lingxian, but after Ye Lingxian entered the spirit dragon's cave a few days ago, it seemed that he had received some inheritance, and looking at it like this, it was clear that the inheritance was not over yet. Just ask Linglong after you go back. He has been coveting Sister Lingxuan's rouge for a long time these days. Musian thought of this and was about to look away. At this time, the corner of his eye suddenly fell on the young man wearing a four-clawed python robe not far ahead. The third prince, Ning Long. He was smiling and chatting in a low voice with a woman in a black dress, and there seemed to be a bit of obsession in his eyes. And the woman in the black skirt is none other than Huang Manting. The goals of these three princes have changed really quickly. The person they were interested in before was Ling Xian, but now they are attracted to the eldest lady of the Chenexai Chamber of Commerce. But yes, Huang Manting does have the charm to attract men. If it weren't for Bai Ruoxi, the position of the most beautiful woman in Tianqian City would have been Huang Manting's. It's a pity that although Miss Huang has a pair of pretty white feet, her breasts are not as big as Bai Ruoxi's. This is a big flaw. And looking at the smiling look on Huang Manting's face now, it is obvious that she is hiding her timid personality. The poor third prince was being manipulated by her, but he didn't know it yet. He thought he was about to capture Huang Manting. Little did he know, he had fallen into the trap of a bad woman. As if aware of Musian's gaze, Huang Manting raised her eyes and then gave him a sweet smile. The third prince had no idea about this and still kept a gentle smile, as if he thought he had won the beauty's heart and made her smile sweetly. Mr. Mu, This man is so annoying. He has been pestering him for the past 2 days. I didn't deliberately seduce him, Huang Manting said through the message. Why are you telling me this? Am I familiar with you? Musian sent a message. This is the third prince of the Dacian dynasty. If Miss Huang seizes the opportunity, she might become a crown princess in the future. Hasn't the crown prince of the Dacian dynasty been decided a long time ago? No matter what happens, the eldest princess will take over, so it won't be his turn, Huang Manting said with disdain in her tone. The current crown prince of the Dacian dynasty was born to the queen. In addition to the crown prince, the eldest princess also had outstanding abilities. If she hadn't been a daughter, perhaps the crown prince's position would have been hers. Musian naturally knew these things, so he just smiled and looked up at the high platform, only to find that the magnificent sect leader had already stood up from the throne and was walking towards the altar in the distance. Worshipping ancestors is said to be a ritual performed only during the opening ceremony of the Lianji sect. However, the ancestor of Lianji Zongji was not the ancestor who founded the sect, but Tao. According to rumors, there was a powerful man who ascended to the immortal stage in the past. He resonated with the way of heaven, and this was the beginning of the era of immortal cultivation. If anything, the immortal who ascended to the immortal stage was the first monk in the world of immortality. Musian looked at concubine Shang Yan, who was dressed in a plain robe, with her hair hanging down like a waterfall on her back, leaving only a beautiful back view, and couldn't help but sigh in her heart, this sect master is really a beauty. However, this kind of existence strategy was too difficult. Musian temporarily restrained his thoughts and, like other disciples, watched the woman walk up to the altar. We'll decide on the inner disciples when the ancestor worship is over, right? Are you sure? The voice of the maid suddenly came to my ears. Musian shook his head gently and said with a smile, even if I am not sure, I will try my best, so that I can be with Sister Mengru in the future. Wei Mengru sneered, Ha, do you really think anyone will choose me as an inner disciple? The world of immortality is very particular about luck. Wei Mengru's luck is so bad that most people would think twice if they knew about her luck. The Linglong's luck had no effect on Sister Mengru before, Musian asked. Yeah, Wei Mengru said calmly. Then, she hesitated for a moment, and whispered again, I'm sorry, I wasted a fortune inheritance. Linglong's luck inheritance was something that countless people would compete for. As a result, she got a piece of luck inheritance but wasted it in vain. It's no wonder that Wei Mengru, with such a cold and arrogant personality, feels a little guilty. Do we need to be so polite to each other, Sister Mengru? Musian shook his head and smiled, fully demonstrating the self-cultivation of a warm man. Besides, you are also at the 5th level of God refining. With such a talent, there are probably many people who want to accept you as their disciple. Musian followed. If the 5th level God refiner at this age had not been hindered by luck and had fewer adventures, Wei Mengru might have achieved a higher level. If the leaders of these sects want to prepare for the upcoming sect competition, there is no way they will let a good young talent like Wei Mengru pass. If you had not become an inner disciple, according to the previous agreement with my wife, I would not have become an inner disciple, Wei Mengru just said in a calm tone. You would rather give up your spot as an inner disciple and follow me, Sister Mengru, you really have a crush on me, right? Musian teased. Wei Mengru glanced at him coldly and was too lazy to talk to him. Musian continued to transmit the message, I am a special recruit, although I am not sure that I will be selected as an inner disciple, I should still be able to operate it. The talent in formations that Musian showed when he was at Kanghai Peak, he also knew that he would be able to attract the attention of those invigilators. Even without this, the identity of Tian Tian Furnace alone is enough to attract these high-level officials. However, Musian didn't want to reveal his identity unless it was absolutely necessary. Although he eats soft food, he only wants to eat soft rice from his senior sister. As for the others, too old and inappropriate. Although all the female elders on the stage seemed to be quite good-looking, Pavilion Master Yan's appearance was even more excellent. She was my type. Mu Jian felt a little emotional. Sure enough, in the world of immortality, one cannot judge a woman solely by her age. If it doesn't work, just take a bite of soft rice. You won't suffer any loss anyway. Mu Jian withdrew his gaze without leaving a trace. Child, come here. At this time, a ghost-like voice suddenly came from his ears. Under the bright sky, there was a cold feeling coming towards his face. Mu Jian's body stiffened for a moment, and he subconsciously turned his head and scanned the surroundings, trying to find the source of the sound, but found that he could not identify the direction of the sound at all. Child, come here. The weak and old voice floated in Mu Jian's ears again. Almost at that moment, Mu Jian's body was filled with countless goosebumps. What's wrong? Wei Mengru obviously noticed something strange about Mu Jian and couldn't help asking. Didn't you hear anything? Mu Jian asked in a low voice. Wei Mengru frowned slightly and said, what do you mean? It seemed that I was the only one who heard this voice, or could it be that someone was transmitting the voice to me? Who could it be? Are those elders on the stage the leaders? No, they are not relatives of me, and it is still the opening ceremony of the section. How could they ask me to go to the high platform to find them now? Or maybe I'm hallucinating. Just as Mu Jian thought about this, the old voice like a ghost came to his ears again. My child. Mu Jian's hair stood on end as he raised his head and stared in the direction of the altar in surprise. That voice came from the altar. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 115. That voice kept lingering in Mu Jian's ears, but in the bright and clear world, it made people feel inexplicably scared. Mu Jian stroked his arm while looking up at the crowd around him. The expressions of each sect disciple were no different from usual, looking at the sect master in front of the altar with admiring eyes, as if they didn't hear anything. Child, I'm here. The old voice came again in his ears, causing Mu Jian to have countless goosebumps at this moment, and he looked up at the woman in front of the altar. Senior Sister Ian's master is the top strong man in the world. She should be able to detect this voice. What exactly is this voice? However, when Mu Jian looked up, he found that Shang Yanfei seemed to know nothing, looking at the altar calmly, performing the ceremony of ancestor worship. My child. The voice was like a demonic sound, causing a layer of cold sweat to seep out of Mu Jian's forehead. In the refreshing autumn, his back was already covered with cold sweat. Wei Mengru obviously noticed the scene and whispered, are you okay? If you are not well, don't force yourself. Let's leave first. Mu Jian shook his head gently, raised his head and stared at the altar. Is there something sealed in here? But even so, it doesn't make sense why only he can hear that voice, but others can't. The chosen son should be Yeyu. Shouldn't this opportunity be given to him? No. This should not be considered an opportunity, but a bad luck. Could it be that I usually pick up too many girls and suffer from the punishment of heaven? It's rare that Mu Jian still has the mind to joke in his heart at this time. He covered his forehead tightly, and felt that the voice kept penetrating his brain and reaching his heart. Everything in front of him seemed to become a little hazy, as if covered by a layer of white mist. Wei Mengru looked at him sideways, with a hint of worry in her cold eyes. At the same time, in front of the altar, Shang Yanfei seemed to have completed the ceremony of worshipping the ancestors and inserted 3 incense sticks in front of the altar. Boom! Thunder roared in the sky. At this time, the voice that had just lingered in Mu Jian's ears suddenly disappeared, and the whispers of the disciples who had just entered the sect came clearly into his ears. But at this time, Mu Jian's forehead had already been sweating. Shang Yanfei walked down the altar, returned to the high platform, glanced at the elder beside him, and transmitted the message, notify others that the selection ceremony for inner disciples will be postponed to 2 days later. The elder was obviously stunned for a moment, but he did not hesitate at all. He nodded slightly and immediately transmitted the message to the person in charge of the opening ceremony of the sect. Shang Yanfei's eyes then fell on a cold and beautiful woman in a moon-white dress in the crowd. Lan Murian obviously noticed the master's gaze, looked up, and just heard Shang Yanfei's voice floating in her ear, "Bring Musian to the back mountain." Musian? Lan Murian's eyes revealed a trace of confusion. Why did the master know Musian's name? And what did she want to do with this little monk? Yes. Although a little puzzled, Lan Murian still maintained a respectful tone of voice transmission to answer. Master's orders, as long as they are carried out unconditionally, it is right. As the person in charge announced that the subsequent inner disciple selection ceremony would be postponed, these sect disciples also left one after another, but when they left, they discussed the reasons for the postponement of the selection ceremony with their companions. I think it's because there are too many geniuses among the disciples who joined the sect this time, so even the head monks need to consider it in detail. Well, there are indeed many geniuses among the disciples who joined the sect this time, which can be called a golden age. And there are many beautiful junior sisters. When the disciples left the pilgrimage hall, they couldn't help but discuss such things. No matter what era it is, the word beauty is always the most discussed topic among men. This is true even in the world of cultivation. But if we talk about the most beautiful junior sister, it should be Bairuoxi, right? Among the disciples who were leaving, someone suddenly mentioned this name. In terms of comprehensive factors, the eldest daughter of the Bai family in Tianqian City is indeed a great beauty, and I'm afraid she can be compared with senior sister Lan. Someone sighed. Didn't junior sister Bai also come to participate in the opening ceremony? Why didn't I see her? Isn't she there? Someone glanced in a certain direction not far away. Many people looked sideways. In the corner of the square where people were coming and going, Bairuoxi, who had a cool and gentle temperament, was holding Musian's arm, sitting in front of a staircase, gently wiping the cold sweat on his forehead with a handkerchief. A luxurious palace skirt set off her snow-white skin. Even if she was only slightly made up, her exquisite profile alone made people fascinated. A young man who looked a little weak was being carefully taken care of by such a beautiful woman. Such a scene would make any man jealous. Many sect disciples who were about to leave slowed down their steps involuntarily. Looking at this enviable scene, they suddenly couldn't help but whispered, "Who is the male cultivator next to her?" The eldest young master of the Mu family is said to have been obsessed with beauty before. I don't know how he pursued junior sister Bai. A genius in the refining spirit realm was actually pursued by a cultivator of the 5th rank of Qi refining. It seems that Master Mu knows how to pursue girls. Listening to the low-voiced discussion of these disciples, someone who had received Musian's favor before finally couldn't help but speak up to defend him. Master Mu is still quite capable. He led us through the assessment of Kanghai Peak on his own before, and he was said to have performed well in Senior Linglong's Cave Heaven before. The assessment of Kanghai Peak. The crowd was moved, and they obviously knew how perverted the sect assessment of the main peak was. A cultivator of the 5th rank of Qi refining can lead a group of disciples through the assessment of Kanghai Peak. Senior Linglong's Cave Heaven. I have heard from my senior brother in the past that most people can't even pass the first level of the puppet dragon. How could he do it? The whispers of these disciples naturally reached Musian's ears. Bairuoxi frowned slightly and whispered, "These people are so annoying." Musian's past performance was obviously excellent, but in the mouths of some people, he was unbearable, and even questioned him. Musian was sitting on a staircase near the pilgrimage hall at this time, with Bairuoxi sitting on his left, and Wei Mengru standing quietly by the side without saying a word. Musian gently patted Bairuoxi's little hand, shook his head and chuckled, "Prejudices in people's hearts are like a mountain. My past performance is too different from now, so it is natural that people will question it. Moreover, it is impossible to lead other disciples through the assessment under normal circumstances for a 5th grade Chi training. If it weren't for the formation in Kanghai Peak, Musian would not have been able to lead other disciples through the assessment. Moreover, some of these people didn't actually doubt him at all, but were just a little jealous of Bairuoxi sitting next to them. This is also understandable. After all, a girl of heaven and a playboy together are indeed bound to cause some criticism. But at least these disciples are very smart. They won't confront others directly like Yayu or Gongsun Cheng. At most, they will talk about it in private. Bairuoxi is a smart woman. Naturally, she knows that it is useless to just defend Musian now. She needs to take it slowly and change other people's views little by little. She also believes that Musian will definitely change those who doubt him in the future. After all, she was prejudiced against Musian like everyone else in the past, right? As a result, since she was with him, she slowly understood his charm. It's not that he is strong in strength, but that he makes people feel at ease when they are with him. It's just that sometimes he likes to stop and tease others in the middle of the bed, which is a bit annoying. It seems that she thought of some not so good pictures, and Miss Bai's face couldn't help but blush shyly. She wiped the cold sweat on Musian's face with a handkerchief, stared into his eyes, and barely restrained her messy thoughts, saying, "Mu Lang, what happened to you just now? Why are your lips so pale?" There was undisguised worry in those bright eyes. Musian looked at this beautiful face and the concern in the girl's eyes, shook his head and smiled. "It's okay, it's not a big problem." Bairuoxi heard this, although there was still some worry in his eyes, but when he heard Musian said this, he didn't continue to ask, but stayed quietly by Musian's side, waiting for him to recover some strength before leaving the pilgrimage temple. Not far away, Yayu, who was wearing a black robe, watched this scene in the crowd. Especially when this beautiful and refined beauty cared about Musian in such a little girl's attitude and showed her gentle side, he couldn't help but recall the indifference and ruthlessness of the other party when she handed him the letter of withdrawal of engagement. The contrast between the two made Yayu's heart only have endless anger. As if he had noticed Yayu's gaze, Musian looked up and saw Yayu among the crowd. Yayu also noticed Musian's gaze, opened his lips slightly, and said two words with his mouth, "You deserve it." Obviously, what Yayu meant by "you deserve it" was naturally referring to Musian's weak state at the moment. Musian naturally didn't care about this. After all, he had Bairuoxi with him now, so how could he care about the sour girl? He was about to look away. At this time, a clear and crisp voice like a silver bell suddenly came from a distance, "Brother Mu." Musian looked up and saw Yechian trotting up in a pair of cloud-embroidered short boots. Her skirt was flying, revealing a pair of snow-white and smooth calves, and her chest swayed gently as she ran. She came to Musian's side, leaned down slightly, looked at his pale face, and said worriedly, "Are you okay, Brother Mu?" Musian forced a smile, shook his head gently and said, "It's okay, thank you for your concern." After that, he asked Yechian to sit beside him first, and then looked up at Yayu who was staring at him, and responded with the same mouth shape, "Your sister is so cute." Looking at Yayu's body obviously stiffened, and the expression on his face was a little unnatural, Musian smiled indifferently and retracted his sight. Although he was a little tired at this time because of the strange voice just now, the two girls beside him now, plus the caring eyes of Sister Mengro next to him, are enough to heal everything. It's a pity that Lingxian and Senior Sister are not here, otherwise it would be more perfect. When Musian just thought of this, he suddenly felt that the voices around him suddenly quieted down. A shadow seemed to be quietly covering him from behind. Musian turned his head subconsciously. Lan Murian was standing not far behind him, with a thin veil covering her cold face. Her rosy lips moved and said, "Come with me to the back mountain." The cold voice, like the sound of dropping ice cubes into a cup, came to his ears, full of the charm of a cold beauty, but also made Musian's body slightly stiff for a while, and he felt what Yayu had just felt. Then, he suddenly reacted. No. What did my senior sister ask me to do in the back mountain at this time? Senior sister, why do you want to go to the back mountain now? Musian asked in a voice transmission. Master is looking for you, Lan Murian also transmitted a voice. Senior sister Ian's master, the leader of the Lianji sect just now. Musian was stunned. Damn, I'm not ready to see the great white shark yet. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 116. In the crowd, when the third prince saw Lan Mulian taking Musian away, his eyes widened quietly, as if he couldn't believe that the other party would be taken away by the senior sister Lan. He had learned about Lan Mulian before entering Lianji sect. As the only close disciple of the sect master, Lan Mulian's identity is extremely special in Lianji sect. A playboy, it's okay to have Bairuoxi and the Yes sisters around him. Why is he involved with senior sister Lan? The third prince stared at the air until the shadow disappeared from his sight, and then he slowly calmed down. Actually, it doesn't matter if you think about it carefully. Anyway, you won't see Musian in 2 days. He and Musian both entered Lianji sect through connections, but so what? The gap between inner disciples and outer disciples is still quite huge. Musian can enter Lianji sect through connections, but it is impossible for him to become an inner disciple through connections, because the Mu family can't reach Lianji sect. But the Dogon dynasty can, at least if they want to become an inner disciple, they can do it by relying on the deputy chief. When they become inner disciples, they can avenge Musian with this identity. As for now, the third prince looked at the woman in black dress who was surrounded by a group of people not far away and smiled like a flower, and his eyes could not help but have a hint of obsession. From the moment he saw her, he realized how stupid he was in the past. Although Bairuoxi was extremely beautiful, the sisters of the Ye family were also very attractive. But the most important thing at the moment was to pursue this beautiful girl, the eldest lady of the Dan Chamber of Commerce, Huang Manting. When the third prince thought of this, Huang Manting seemed to have sensed something, looked up, and then showed him a charming smile. The third prince seemed to have his soul taken away, and strode towards Huang Manting. At the same time, on the other side, Yayu looked up and stared at the direction where Musian left, and suddenly asked in his heart, "Teacher, is what you just said true? Is there really something sealed in the pilgrimage hall? I did feel a little movement at that time, I can't be wrong," the old voice came slowly. "So what you have to do now is not to take revenge on Musian, but to continue to practice hard in the next 2 days. If you become an inner disciple in the future, the distance between you and him will become larger and larger. At that time, it will not be difficult to deal with him. In addition, after becoming an inner disciple, come to the pilgrimage hall first, maybe you will find some treasures." Listen to the teacher's teachings. Yayu's eyes were ablaze with war, and his heart was excited. Yes, no matter how capable Musian is now, this is also Lianji sect. To become an inner disciple, you look at talent. And talent happens to be what Musian does not have. That person is just a despicable villain who knows how to be clever. Lingxian and Qianer were all bewitched by him, and even his ex-fiancée. I'm afraid the same is true. Lingxian and Bairuoxi will surely become inner disciples. By that time, Yayu sneered secretly, turned around and followed the crowd to leave the pilgrimage hall. On the other side, Musian bid farewell to the maid and Bairuoxi for the time being, and followed Lan Murian to the back mountain of Lianji Peak. There is a pavilion in front of the back mountain, and the table is octagonal and made of bluestone. Musian followed Lan Murian to the pavilion and saw the sect leader standing in front of the pavilion, with his back to them and his hands behind his back. Her long hair fell down like a waterfall without decoration, and her plain robe covered her protruding figure. Although she was dressed simply, the back of this woman made people's minds gradually active. Looking more carefully, Musian found that he seemed to be unable to see her appearance clearly. There was a vague feeling that seemed to be both real and unreal. "Are you here?" a crisp and pleasant voice came. For a moment, Musian had the urge to worship. Just when he opened his mouth, it made people feel like seeing an immortal, and they couldn't help but feel awe. "You must not kneel. After all, the master is also a woman, and a great beauty who is stunningly beautiful." Musian suppressed the urge to pay homage in his heart and looked at Shang Yanfei's peerless back. Slowly, the passion of LSP gradually dispersed the urge to pay homage in his heart. At the same time, Lan Murian also quietly left the court. Shang Yanfei turned around and walked to the table and sat down. She waved her hand, and a pot of tea and 2 teacups appeared out of thin air in front of the table. "Sit down, so many things happened today, I must be thirsty." Musian nodded respectfully and sat opposite Shang Yanfei. Then he couldn't help but look at her, but found that he seemed to be a little unclear about her appearance. It wasn't the feeling of being covered with mosaics, but the next moment he saw her, he forgot her face. "If you have anything to ask, feel free to ask." Shang Yanfei smiled. Musian hesitated for a moment and said, "Did the sect master hear any strange sounds in front of the altar today?" "Yes." Shang Yanfei nodded. "Is there anything sealed in the altar of the pilgrimage hall?" Musian asked again. Then, he paused and said, "Do I need to know about the pilgrimage hall?" "No need. Forget it, just pretend I didn't ask just now." Musian nodded assuredly. Concubine Shang Yan slowly took a sip of tea and said with a smile, "Aren't you curious what that sound is? Anyway, it's not something I can touch now. Since the sect leader didn't react at all, there's no need for me to worry about it," Musian said. "This kid is quite smart." Concubine Shang Yan looked at Musian with a slight smile and said, "Do you have any other questions? Will the sect master still accept disciples?" Musian tried to hug the sect master's thigh. Concubine Shang Yan slowly shook her head, "We are not suitable." "Why does it sound like I was expressing my love to her but was rejected by her?" Musian asked. "How much does the sect leader know about me?" This is actually a bit like the Riddler. Musian is not sure how much this woman knows about him, and whether she even knows that the Queen of the Demon Realm left a certain mark on him. So with such a vague question, you may be able to get some words out of it. However, to Musian's disappointment, Concubine Shang Yan only shook her head slightly and said, "Your question is too vague. Be more specific." Musian was silent for a moment and said, "Forget it, I have nothing more to ask." 2 days later, the 9 major masters will select 9 inner disciples. If they become inner disciples, they will get more resources, which will help their future practice. Concubine Shang Yan put down the teacup gently, raised her eyes to look at him, and smiled sweetly. "The information within the sect that can be obtained will be more. If you want to enter the chess game, this is the first step." Musian's hand stiffened slightly as he picked up the teacup. What the leader of the Liangyi sect just said already had a somewhat clear meaning. Concubine Shang Yan probably knew that the Queen of the Demon Realm had come to see him. Musian thought for a moment, and finally made up his mind, raised his head and said, "Sect Master, actually dash." Concubine Shang Yan raised her finger slightly and put it on her lips, smiling, "You are a secret agent, you shouldn't explain anything." Musian stared at this extremely beautiful face. The meaning of her words had been made very obvious. Concubine Shang Yan knew everything, but said nothing. She's pretending to be confused. As for the reason, Maybe it's because if he admits that the queen of the demon realm has come to see him, the sky-swallowing giant python will immediately notice it. The two empresses were playing chess, and he was one of the chess pieces, a chess piece between black and white. He is not only a person of the queen of the demon realm, but also a person of the sect master. It's not easy to be a second-year-old. Musian was silent for a moment, sighed to himself, and changed the topic to a lighter topic. Has the sect leader ever received a snow lotus? Are you referring to the snow lotus that happened to be delivered to me by accident? Concubine Shangyan opened her palms, and a pure and flawless snow lotus suddenly appeared in her hands. It was on that day that Musian passed the paper crane and planned to give the snow lotus to Lan Mulian. The leader of the Liangyi sect is indeed my pen pal. Even though he had already guessed this possibility, Musian was still a little shocked when he actually heard the other party admit it personally. This big shark cannot be raised in my fish pond for the time being. If it is really raised in a fish pond, it will probably eat me, the owner of the fish pond, together one day. After learning this fact, Musian felt a little disappointed, but also inexplicably moved. This is probably the unobtainable thing that will always cause turmoil. The two of them finished a cup of tea without realizing it, and Musian finally decided to get up and leave. What is sealed in the pilgrimage hall has nothing to do with him, a monk in the Qi training realm. After all, he can't affect the overall situation. The sect master knew exactly what to do. As for other matters, such as how to become an inner disciple, Musian would not ask the sect leader for help. Although he doesn't mind eating soft food, the realm of the sect leader is too high. If he accepts too many favors from the other party before his good feelings are fully developed, the emotional status between the two parties will become unequal, which will make people feel a sense of indifference. Is he pursuing me for some benefit? It's going to be hard at that point. When Musian was about to leave the pavilion, he paused slightly, turned his head and looked over, and said with a smile, "This junior has a humble status, and cannot be compared with the sect master." However, what was said in the paper crane before is true. "Are those paper cranes of yours addressed to my disciple?" Concubine Shangyan asked with an obvious smile that seemed a bit teasing. "It was just an accident that it was delivered to me." Musian showed a spring-like smile and said softly, "It is indeed a coincidence, but maybe it is a fateful coincidence." Under Concubine Shangyan's gaze, Musian left the pavilion in a happy mood. Under normal circumstances, he would not have spoken to the sect leader like this just now. But the other party had replied to him so many times before, and there was even some ambiguity in his words. In this case, it meant that he could take the initiative. Of course, you have to properly control your favorability. If you accidentally conquer it, Musian will not be ecstatic, but will be a little worried. After all, it is a great white shark, and it will eat people if kept in a fish pond. Let's take it slow and step by step. Musian thought about such things and waited outside the pavilion for a moment when he saw a woman in a white dress slowly floating on the clouds from a distance. "Senior sister!" Musian took the initiative and shouted. Lan Mulian glanced at the already empty pavilion and said, "What did master ask you?" "Some things that cannot be said yet," Musian said. Lan Mulian frowned slightly, seeming unhappy, but did not continue to ask. She changed the question, "Are you confident about the position of inner disciple?" When Musian heard this, he immediately felt sad and sighed. To be honest, it's quite difficult. It is true that he is a recommended student, but he is only recommended to Liangyi section. Whether he can become an inner disciple depends on his ability. "Senior sister, do you still accept people from Liangyi Ifeng? How about I become your apprentice?" Musian suddenly smiled. Lan Mulian smiled slightly. "You still have the heart to make a joke. It seems you are quite confident." Musian shook his head helplessly and sighed. "Too much time was wasted in the past, and now I can't improve my level in a short time." "If you had no choice, you wouldn't show such a relaxed expression." Lan Mulian glanced sideways at him, waiting for his answer. Senior sister really knows me well. This woman is too smart. Mu Ji settled down for a moment and continued, fifth level of Qi training is not enough to become an inner disciple. But, I'm an art student. It is not realistic to directly join the 9 major peaks and become an inner disciple. After all, there are so many people competing for a spot, and everyone has to fight hard. However, in addition to the 9 main peaks, there are also certain neutral forces. To put it bluntly, if you want to become an inner disciple, you do not have to pass the first of the 9 main peaks. A simpler approach could be used. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 117. How do you feel about meeting the master this time? On the way back, Lan Murian, riding the cloud, suddenly asked. She is very big, very white, and has a good figure. The only problem is that the oppression is too strong, and it is difficult for ordinary people to control her. Musian complained in his heart and said respectfully, the sect master is peerless, his words and deeds are very charming, and he is a respectable person. Shang Yanfei is indeed a wonderful woman, but it's a pity that Musian doesn't know whether it is her strength or her own temperament. This woman doesn't look like a target that can be conquered at present. Even if she can really be pursued in the future, it will not be easy to control. Lan Murian nodded slightly, her voice was cold and pleasant. She rarely sees people. You think there is some reason for meeting her this time? Since it is not convenient to say, I am not convenient to ask. However, if she tells you something, remember to keep it in mind. Sister really cares about what the sect master said to me, and is trying to get me to say. Musian nodded slightly and said yes respectfully. Led by Lan Murian, the two returned to the glazed hall without realizing it. After Musian jumped down from the cloud, he suddenly remembered something, looked up at the cold and noble senior sister, and asked, by the way, senior sister, I just picked 2 peach blossoms at the pilgrimage hall 2 days ago. Should it be okay? Why pick peach blossoms? Lan Murian smiled, as long as you don't pick all the peach blossoms, no one will say anything. After all, the pilgrimage hall is a place for Taoist couples to chat after practicing on weekdays. In addition to you, there are people who do this occasionally. Although he wanted to know why Musian picked peach blossoms, Lan Murian did not speak for the sake of face. He glanced at Musian who was standing on the golden talisman bridge and said, practice well these 2 days and don't waste your talent. It is obvious that he should have at least the 8th level of Qi training now, but now he is only the 5th level of Qi training. This is the price he paid for indulging in beauty in the past. Lan Murian was about to leave when she thought of this. At this time, Musian suddenly called her, sister, wait. Lan Murian turned her head and saw Musian walking up in small steps, and then carefully took out a long and narrow wooden box from the ring. What is this? Lan Murian's eyes flickered slightly, a little puzzled. She took the small wooden box and slightly opened the box. A pink petal hidden in the small wooden box came into view. It was placed in the Liuguang soil and was moistened by the soil, so there was no sign of withering. Although this peach blossom can be seen everywhere in the pilgrimage temple, I still hope that senior sister can accept it. Musian looked at Lan Murian's veiled face and said seriously. Pastor brother, do you want to say that peach blossoms are very similar to me? Lan Murian closed the lid of the wooden box again and looked at him with a slight smile. The snow lotus represents the reserved surface of senior sister, while the peach blossom actually represents senior sister's heart. Musian sighed softly. Of course, senior sister may not believe me now, but even so, I still want to give it to senior sister instead of keeping it in my ring to gather dust. When Musian said this, he looked up and stared at Lan Murian, saying, senior sister, can I see your face? The sudden challenge made Lan Murian hesitate slightly, and she never spoke. Musian looked up at Lan Murian and whispered, if I could see senior sister's face, I would be more motivated to fight for the quota of inner disciples. Seeing that Lan Murian never responded, Musian sighed softly and turned to return to the glazed hall. At this time, a cold and crisp voice suddenly came from behind, "If you can become an inner disciple in the future, I will give you a gift." Musian subconsciously turned his head to look, and Lan Murian took off the veil on her face. In an instant, even the peach blossom in her hand seemed to be eclipsed. Musian stared at Lan Murian's beautiful face. Although he had roughly guessed that the other person should look similar to Fei Ying through his imagination, when he really saw her face, his eyes were still attracted uncontrollably. It seemed that she had just accepted someone's peach blossom, or because she took off her veil on her own initiative, the usually unattainable cold and beautiful senior sister now had two faint blushes on her beautiful face. This is a bit like a girl. Usually, she always upholds the noble and reserved senior sister, not like a cute girl at all. Now this is perfect, Musian thought to himself. She is both cold and charming. If there is really a jade beauty, it is probably a woman like Lan Murian. Musian clasped his fists. "Sister, I will work hard to become an inner disciple for you." Lan Murian opened her cherry lips slightly and said, "It's not for me, it should be for yourself. Your purpose was wrong from the beginning. A gentleman loves a beautiful lady, how can it be considered a wrong path?" Musian stared at Lan Murian's cold eyes and said, "Sister, I will go back to meditate and practice." Lan Murian nodded politely, watched Musian leave, and gently stroked the ring on her right hand. In her ring, there are medicinal materials and prescriptions for the Jinpin pill. This pill can be promoted to the first grade when taking one when in the Qi training stage, but it can only be used once. It suits him quite well. However, giving someone such a valuable thing will inevitably make him feel like he is being given alms. A man's self-esteem always explodes in strange places. But if he could become an inner disciple, Musian would naturally not refuse him on this basis. Lan Murian controlled the clouds, turned around and left Liulai Palace, flying to the back mountain of Lianji Peak. In the other garden, Musian naturally didn't know what his senior sister was thinking at this moment. After returning to the small room, he came to a certain room, raised his hand and knocked lightly on the door. "Senior Lin Ling." The door quietly opened a crack, and in the crack, a bright red eye was secretly observing Musian. After confirming the identity of the other party, he quietly opened the door. When Musian walked into the room, he seemed to vaguely smell the scent of meat that filled the room, and subconsciously looked at Lin Ling, who was sitting at the table. She looked indifferent, lying on the table, her breasts pressed against the table, her eyes seemed a little dull, and she was obviously in a daze. Her silver hair is spread down to her waist, and she has no shoes on her feet. Under her skirt, her white feet are dangling. Well, this one is even more heavyweight, with the same amount of breasts as Ruoxi. Musian looked at Lin Ling lying on the table, but quickly realized the point. "Senior Lin Ling, why do I feel that the 8 treasure crane's spiritual energy in this room is so strong? Did you just eat another one?" Lin Ling raised her eyes slightly, glanced at Musian, shook her head slightly, and pointed to the table. "It's not for me." "Who is that?" Musian asked curiously. Lin Ling glanced at him but said nothing. She didn't want to answer. Musian changed the topic. "The other 8 treasure cranes." Lin Ling took off the NA ring on her finger and handed it to him. "After returning the 8 treasure crane tomorrow, I will return the Naja in its entirety," Musian said seriously. Boom boom. Lin Ling knocked on the table lightly and pointed to the text that appeared on the table. "I'm hungry." "I know, I will prepare dinner for you later," Musian smiled. Although he knew that with a being like Spirit Dragon, he wouldn't feel hungry, but since the other party wanted to have dinner, it wouldn't hurt to prepare a meal for her. After all, cooking yourself is also a way to gain favor. After bidding farewell to Lin Ling, Musian walked along the corridor towards Bai Ruoxi's room. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the woman in the yellow dress who was about to hide in the shadows. Even though he had been looking at the face of the maid's sister for a long time, Musian was still surprised by her profile and said, "Sister Mengru, is Ruoxi in the room?" Wei Mengru glanced over and said calmly, "She is meditating in the room and seems to have touched the threshold of the second level of refining the gods." Musian. "I'm about to reach the sixth level of divine refining," Wei Mengru added. "Are you competing with Ruoxi for favor?" Musian said happily, "Sister Mengru's talent is really amazing. Having you here is really reassuring." The maid in the yellow skirt puffed out her towering breasts and walked gracefully. She stopped in front of Musian and suddenly said, "Someone is investigating your matter." As he was admiring the long snow-white legs under the maid's gauze-like yellow skirt, upon hearing this, Musian calmed down his thoughts slightly and said to himself, "Yeah, you should have no power in the Lianji sect, and neither does Gongsun Chang so, but it seems that these are the only two people I have offended recently." Musian's voice paused and said, "Third Prince." Unlike Yayu and other protagonists, Musian takes the friendly route and tries not to conflict with others as much as possible. Not only does he avoid conflict, he also blends in with others. But there are so many people in the world, and you can't satisfy everyone. There will always be some narrow-minded people who are jealous of you. Let's not talk about Yayu for the time being. The other party is the protagonist, and Tiandao will always make arrangements for Musian to be Yayu's stepping stone. Gongsun Cheng simply had some disputes between the Gongsun family and the Mu family in the past, and he himself was rather arrogant. As for the third prince, it's because of women. Wei Mengru nodded silently and said, "He seems to have a certain amount of energy in the Lianji sect, so it is only a matter of time before we want to investigate your life experience." Musian pondered for a moment, then smiled and said, "Then let him investigate." Wei Mengru hesitated and said, "Aren't you afraid that your leverage will fall into his hands?" "Do I have any clues?" Musian asked. "In the past, I was uneducated and obsessed with beauty. I would go to Jiao Fangxi every now and then, or listen to music on Golan. Isn't this something that the entire Tianqian city knows?" Mu Jian said frankly. Wei Mengru looked at him silently, her mouth slightly opened, but for a moment she didn't know how to answer. "Indeed, if we have to talk about dark history, my young master only has this bit of dark history. But for those disciples from wealthy families, this is nothing at all. However, there is nothing wrong with me, but the people around me may need to pay attention," Musian continued. Wei Mengru raised her eyebrows slightly. "You mean, by Ruoxi?" Musian nodded slightly. "There is a trace of evil spirit left in Bai Ruoxi's cauldron. This matter has caused such a big fuss in Tianqian city before, so it is not difficult to investigate it. Moreover, the third prince has recently been in contact with Huang Manting, so he may hear something from her. I have to find time to get in touch with Huang Manting a little bit." When Musian thought of this, Wei Mengru reminded him in a cold tone, "Anyway, you have to be careful and don't get caught." Musian smiled and nodded, "I know that if the handle is really going to fall, I can only rest assured if it falls into my own hands. Or I wouldn't mind if the situation falls into the hands of Sister Mengru one day," Musian complained. "I accidentally glanced at the graceful figure of this tall beauty and couldn't help but sigh in my heart, Sister Mengru and I are a perfect match." "What are you looking at?" Wei Mengru noticed that Musian's eyes were scanning her from top to bottom, and finally landed on her feet. She subconsciously shrank her feet and gave him a disdainful glance. "It's okay, I was just in a daze." Musian came to his senses and said with a smile, "I'll go see Ruoxi first and remind her to be careful these days. After all, someone is investigating them, so it's better to pay a little attention. The handle must be in one's own hands to be safe." After bidding farewell to Wei Mengru, Musian came to Bai Ruoxi's room and opened the door. Sandalwood was burning next to the bed. Musian looked up and saw Bai Ruoxi sitting on the sofa with her legs tilted. Her white palace clothes contrasted with her snow-white complexion. She supported the bed with her hands, and her feet were slightly together. She was wearing little white socks, with a snow-white complexion. But that's not the point. The point is, a pair of cute fox ears appeared on her head at some point. She was biting her lips, her eyes filled with mist, confused and helpless. As if aware that Musian was at the door, Bairuoxi raised her head slightly, and her pretty face seemed to have more charm and temptation than it had in the past, which was cold and weak. Mulang, there seems to be something wrong, Bairuoxi shouted weakly. Musian was stunned for a moment, and wanted to turn around and say softly to Wei Meng, who was not far from the door, "Wife, come and see, it's the fox-eared girl." However, if he shouted to Wei Mengru like this, he would probably only get a big eye roll from Wei Mengru. And when he saw Bairuoxi's fox ears, he was so happy that he quickly frowned inadvertently. Why does she have fox ears now? This is the Liangyi section. Although the sect leader may not say anything due to his open-mindedness, there is no guarantee that other disciples will also not have any gossip. People are jealous, and Bairuoxi is beautiful and talented, with almost no shortcomings, and she already has a Taoist partner. If someone catches a black spot at this time, it will inevitably be discussed in private. Moreover, the third prince was secretly investigating his affairs. If anyone knew about this matter, there would probably be some trouble. Musian turned around and closed the door, walked to the edge of the bed, observed Bairuoxi's delicate and flawless face at close range, and suddenly said, "When will the reaction of the three-tailed fox appear?" Bairuoxi bit her moist lips and said softly, "I have been meditating and practicing when I just came back. As a result, when I felt that I touched the threshold of the second level of Shenlian, I suddenly felt an itching feeling in my heart. When I came back, when God comes, he will find." When she said this, she lowered her head, but raised her misty eyes to look at Musian, with a deep apology in her eyes. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." She knew what the three-tailed fox characteristics on her body meant within the section. Even if senior sister Lan didn't mind, it would always cause some criticism. This will also bring a lot of trouble to Musian. It seems that as the realm increases, the three-tailed fox blood originally hidden in Bairuoxi's body will gradually awaken. Musian sat on the edge of the bed, holding Bairuoxi's soft little hand, staring into her eyes, seriously wrote, "Have you grown a tail?" No. Bairuoxi's snow-white cheeks were full of confusion and helplessness, but they also made those peach blossom eyes even more charming. When she was in the room, she had been thinking about how Musian would react when he saw her later. Worry after a surprise. With Musian's character, he should hide all his worries in his heart and then speak out to comfort her. But this will only make Bairuoxi feel more guilty, thinking that she has dragged down Musian. But who would have thought that Musian's focus would be his tail? "Malang, aren't you worried about what will happen if this matter is exposed?" Musian gently pinched Bairuoxi's feet wrapped in white socks and looked up at this cold and beautiful face. I don't know if it was because of the fox ears, but he always felt that the girl's temperament seemed more charming than usual. "Worried, but don't be in a hurry." Musian couldn't help raising his hand and gently touching her soft lips. "There are more things that need to be done now." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 118. Although the natural furnace cauldron is good, it's a pity that it is completely useless to me. Musian was lying on the bed, holding Bairuoxi's slender waist with one hand, holding her in his arms, looking at the high beams under the ceiling, bored. "Mulang, this is not the time for us to do this kind of thing, right?" Bairuoxi raised her eyes slightly, looking at this handsome face. Bairuoxi had been extremely disgusted with Musian for a long time. One of the reasons was that Musian traveled around the Jiaofang department all year round and had some close relationships with some courtesans. Secondly, it was because the dog-licking attitude he used to pursue himself became more and more annoying the more she looked at him, so much so that her handsome face was not pleasing to her eyes. Otherwise, when I begged him for mercy for the first time in the carriage, I wouldn't have been so dismissive of Musian. Probably no one would have thought that the boy she despised in the past would now be the sweetheart she truly loved. Musian turned his head and looked at Biruoxi's pretty face, which was as red as drunkenness. The experience in the room just now made the usually elegant and reserved young lady's hair look a little messy. But it doesn't feel sloppy, but adds a bit of messy beauty. If you don't do this kind of thing now, when will you do it? Musian said with a smile. And, that's not what you said just now, right? He leaned into Biruoxi's ear and added softly, with a hint of teasing in his words. This also caused the girl's eyes to become misty involuntarily, and she lowered her eyes shyly. Such a shy and lovely posture is rarely seen outside. Even the disciples of Tianqian City and even the Lianji sect probably would not have thought of this person who is usually cold and makes people feel ashamed just by looking at his face. Women, when in bed, will show such a clingy little girl attitude. Even though he no longer had that desire after the incident, seeing the girl's shy posture, Musian still couldn't help but lean forward slightly and kissed her pretty, blushing face. Then, he reached out and gently touched the fox ears on her head. Don't touch that ear. Biruoxi shouted shyly, gently raising her bare hand and holding down Musian's palm that was rubbing the fox ear on her head. Musian then squeezed Biruoxi's hand and said with a smile, I didn't expect you to actually grow fox ears, it's a pity that you don't have a tail. When he said this, he couldn't help but sigh. He was still looking forward to what the three-tailed fox would look like in its human form. Biruoxi secretly rolled her eyes at him and said, this is not an interesting joke. When she said this, she held down Musian's other hand that was wandering under the quilt, and sighed softly, if someone sees this posture, it may affect the quota of inner disciples. If this is the case, it only means that the vision of those leaders is nothing more than this, Musian said with a smile, holding the delicate body of the girl lying on his side in his arms. He paused and continued, can't you hide your fox ears? It stands to reason that if Bai Yuanfeng can hide his aura, Biruoxi should be able to do the same. Biruoxi nodded slightly and said softly, yes, but it will take at least a day. When one is promoted from the first level of God refining to the second level of God refining, the cauldron in the body will expand accordingly, and the bloodline of the three-tailed fox will also be activated a little. The gap between the Qi refining realm and the God refining realm is truly a change of heaven and earth, not only in terms of strength, but also in the awakening of bloodline. Although the power of the awakened three-tailed fox can become stronger, when the relationship between human monks and demon cultivators is so tense, this power will appear a bit sensitive if it is directly exposed to the public. Mr. Mu, if you tell the truth, will you dislike me? Biruoxi raised her eyes slightly and suddenly asked uneasily. Musian lowered his head and looked at the beauty in his arms. Xiaona's face was still flushed after practicing, and her beautiful peach blossom eyes were covered with a layer of mist, shining brightly in the candlelight. Musian couldn't help but raise his hand to wipe away the water droplets from the corners of Biruoxi's eyes, stared into her eyes, and said with a smile, I've said it before, to me, this is not something worth despising. Is there really someone who doesn't like the fox-eared girl? And it's a three-tailed fox. If Biruoxi works hard in the future, maybe Biruoxi can become a nine-tailed fox. By then, she will probably be on the same level as the sky-swallowing python and the sect leader. With Biruoxi's talent, it is not impossible to reach that level in the future. By then, I should be able to eat soft food with peace of mind, Musian couldn't help but think. He doesn't have that weird self-esteem. After all, how many people dream of being able to eat like a beautiful woman? This soft rice is delicious and fragrant. But now, Musian is just working hard in this direction. Senior Sister Lan and Ye Lingxian are both gifted beings, we should find a way to give Qianer some gold fingers. Musian had already looked away. It's true that he is a talented person who is jealous of the gods. To put it bluntly, he has a talent that makes even the gods jealous, but the problem is that everyone around him is the same as him, possessing monster-level talents. Moreover, they also have gold fingers. This is something Musion does not have. It's not that he didn't work hard to get the golden fingers, but he couldn't use the golden fingers he got, which was very helpless. In the game, Musion probably belongs to the kind of god-level support who is not very strong in combat, but can provide crazy experience and equipment to his teammates. Moreover, this god-level assistant is even a gold finger himself, mainly used to help the girls around him improve their realm. I won't be surprised when the supporting role in the human interface becomes auxiliary or heroine, Mujian complained silently in his heart. Bairuoxi saw that there was really no trace of disgust on Musion's face. Not only that, but the look made her eyes burn even more intensely. She couldn't help but lowered her eyes shyly and said in a low voice, "Makaro's hobby is really strange." Musion gently stroked Bairuoxi's hair, looked down at the beauty's shy pretty face, and said, "Anyway, you will be in seclusion in the room for the next 2 days, first suppress the evil spirit in the cauldron, and then put it into the cauldron hide these ears." When he said this, he gently touched the fox ears on Bairuoxi's head. Seeing her shoulders trembling slightly and twisting her body to resist his hand, he couldn't help but smile. "Actually, your demonic aura is quite strong." "Timely." Bairuoxi raised her eyes slightly and looked at Musion. "What does Mu Lang mean?" "The third prince is investigating my affairs, probably trying to find my weaknesses," Musion said. "But I don't have any weaknesses. The only dark history is that I used to go to the Jiaofang division." Bairuoxi's eyes were slightly darker, and the look in her eyes that looked at Musion seemed to have a strange light in addition to the obsession just now. "Speaking of which, Mu Lang often went to Jiaofangsi in the past, but he restrained himself later when he pursued me. But recently, he has become very close to the sisters of the Ye family and senior sister Lan." Bairuoxi didn't say anything. She just put her slender white hands on Musion's back, buried her in his arms, and closed her eyes slightly. "Why do I feel that the atmosphere is not right?" Musion lowered his head and looked at the silent Bairuoxi, and continued, "In short, the third prince cannot investigate me, but he may investigate the people around me. He will definitely not be able to find out about Sister Mengru, because her hometown is far, far away from here, but he can probably find out about you. Yayu's revelation that you were a demon cultivator made a big fuss in Tianqian City before. If he wants to find out, he can find out in a short time," Musion continued. There was a hint of worry in Bairuoxi's eyes, and she whispered, "What should we do?" What happened in Tianqian City before was that the Mu family's power dominated everything, and Musion could collude with everyone. But if the third prince takes this opportunity to cause trouble within the Lianji section, the Lianji sect is not that rigid. With your talent, they will protect you no matter what. After all, you are innocent," Musion said with a smile. "Rather, it's actually a rare opportunity." "Opportunity?" Bairuoxi raised her misty eyes and looked at Musion. Musion gently stroked Bairuoxi's smooth face and said with a smile, "Since someone wants to collect information about me, they want to catch me. Then just calmly give him all my information." "No," Musion shook his head and said, "not only my information, but also your information, and even the information that you previously revealed that you are a demon cultivator will be given to him." Bairuoxi looked at Musion with disbelief, opened her mouth slightly and said, "Mu Lang, what are you planning to do? You do have demonic energy in your body, and since you may have the possibility of exploding demonic energy every time you are promoted, we might as well let everyone know that there is demon energy here." Muji settled down for a moment and continued, "However, you are not the one with the evil spirit." "Who is that?" Bairuoxi asked subconsciously. "A person with demonic aura within himself," Musion said with a smile. Bairuoxi blinked, and hesitated for a moment. Then, she seemed to think of someone, and her eyes slowly opened wide. You mean she dash. Muzian put his fingers on Bairuoxi's lips and let out a shhh. Bairuoxi hesitated and said, will she agree? She doesn't care about such trivial matters, Muzian said with a smile. All she cared about was what she had for dinner. The third prince? Or is it the person behind the third prince? No matter whether you are the leader or an elder, it is useless for anyone to question you. Although she won't take the initiative to help, she can't take the initiative or be passive, just like Muzian. Sometimes when she gets tired of taking the initiative, she will passively accept Bairuoxi's love. How are you going to send the information to the third prince? Bairuoxi asked hesitantly. He will definitely find someone he trusts to collect information, right? Anyone with a normal mind would do this. Muzian nodded slightly. I definitely can't send this information, and the people I know are not suitable, because the other party will be suspicious. However, there is someone who would be perfect for the role. After all, we are all from Tianqian City, so it is normal to help each other. Didn't her father say the same thing? Seeing Bairuoxi's eyes full of confusion, Muzian did not explain any more, but lowered his head to kiss Bairuoxi's lips and covered her with the quilt. Anyway, get some sleep first, and we'll talk about the rest later. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 119. Muzian once again devoted his part to Bairuoxi's cauldron without any interest, and after a while of warmth with this beauty in bed, he got out of bed refreshed and left the room. I just made a promise to the rice cook, Miss Ling Long. If I break my promise now, I'm not sure she will come here, or maybe she will try to trick Babao again. The leader of Kanghai Peak will cry if he finds out. Muzian left the room, and after arranging Linglong's dinner, he went to the study and lit a candle. He sat at his desk, took out 2 paper cranes, and opened one of them. Then, I started writing letters. This letter is written to the sect leader Shang Yanfei. Sect Master, when you invited me to meet today, to be honest, in addition to excitement and nervousness, I was filled with anticipation. In fact, when I came to Liangyi sect, I had already guessed the identity of the pen pal who had written to me before. Whether he is the sect leader or not, when I verified this fact today, I was not only surprised, but also a little worried. After all, the status gap between you and me is really too big. But even so, it's still very pleasant to talk with you. Whether it's the sect leader's experience or his maturity in dealing with feelings, it's worth learning from the younger generation. Speaking of which, today I heard that the Liangyi sect's pilgrimage hall is a good place for dating between Taoist couples. The sect master is very familiar with the Liangyi section. If there is a chance in the future, I hope to have the opportunity to go to the court with the sect master. Admire the peach blossoms on the path of the temple. I'm sorry, I'm rude, Junior. However, if these feelings are expressed without writing, they will still make people feel tormented. The above words are all the true feelings of this Junior. It's just a pity that in the end, the Junior couldn't remember the face of the sect leader. Ugh. After Muzian finished writing, he read it over and over again, and after confirming that there were no major problems with the language and emotional expression in the letter, he nodded with satisfaction, folded the paper crane, and threw it out of the window. The leader of the Aesthesia sect is a great white shark and difficult to operate, but it is still necessary to keep in touch. Concubine Shang Yan's personality was slightly different in the letter and when she met in reality. In the letter, she would occasionally say something teasing to others, but in reality, concubine Shang Yan had the majesty of an empress. No matter how casual she behaved, she still had a sense of calmness and authority. Even LSPS like Muzian felt huge pressure in front of her. But when communicating with the sect master in letters, you can be appropriately bold. For example, regarding this date invitation, it is impossible for the head of the Liangyi sect to go on a date with a disciple of his sect at the pilgrimage temple. But such an invitation can reveal the admiration and entanglement of an innocent boy who admires and has a crush on the sect leader. People with better reading comprehension will be more able to appreciate his sincerity. After writing the first letter, Musian opened another paper crane. Think about it carefully. Since joining the Liangyi sect, senior sister and I have been busy with our own affairs and have no time to send messages on paper cranes. The night is long and I have no intention of sleeping, so I will place my thoughts tonight on paper cranes. After writing the 800-word love letter, Musian pondered for a moment and continued to write, I saw senior sister's face today, and when I fell asleep at night, I couldn't help but imagine walking with senior sister in the section scene. I know this wish may be a bit far away, but people always have small dreams. I hope I can have such an opportunity in the future. After folding the second letter into a paper crane, Musian threw it out of the window. After watching the two paper cranes disappear from sight, he stood up, stretched his waist, and left the study. I don't know who built this glazed palace. There is a cave behind every room. This is true for Bairuoxi and Musian, and the same is true for other sect disciples. Musian found Huang Manting's mansion and saw a pretty female disciple at the door. After the female disciple went in first to report about Musian and received an accurate answer, Musian entered the side hall under her guidance. Sister is still bathing. Mr. Mu, please wait a moment. The female disciple nodded politely and looked at Musian secretly with a somewhat hostile look. This Huang Manting seems to be quite capable. She had been in the Genexi Chamber of Commerce before, but in the end, she was still able to receive a little brother in the Liangyi sect. And she's quite pretty. Musian made himself a cup of tea while looking at the figure of this female disciple. She looked quite plump, and her thighs felt a little fleshy. Musian withdrew his gaze without leaving any trace. Looking at her more often is a sign of respect for a beautiful woman. Staring at her is called being a hooligan. After waiting in the side hall for nearly half an hour, I saw Huang Manting coming out from behind the side hall. Whether it was because she knew Musian was coming or because she had just taken a bath, Huang Manting deliberately wore a loose and casual robe, revealing a pair of round and tight long legs, a slender waist and plump and tall breasts. She sat gracefully at the table, sitting upright, with her left leg resting on her right leg, dangling her white feet, tempting Musian intentionally or unintentionally. Huang Manting thinks that she is as beautiful as a fairy, but the other party already has the eldest lady of the Bai family by her side. If she continues to pretend to be a reserved lady like in the past, she may never be able to hook up with him in this life. Let him kneel at his feet. That's why she changed her clothes when she heard Musian was visiting while she was taking a rose bath. Although Musian was smart, he was so obsessed with beauty in the past that it was impossible for him to change his ways so quickly. Besides, she had just heard a few days ago that Musian and the Yes sisters were also very close. However, to Huang Manting's disappointment, when she sat down, Musian only glanced at her and quickly looked away. Obviously, because of Bairuoxi and the maid Wei Men grew at home, Musian has become highly immune to beauty. However, she would not give up her prey so easily. Huang Manting raised her eyes and gave a look to the female disciple beside her. The female disciple seemed a little reluctant, but finally nodded reluctantly and left the side hall. Huang Manting raised her hands, poured a cup of tea for Musian, and said with a smile, Mr. Mu, I have never seen you come to see me since you entered the section. What brings you here today? Or. She gently covered the back of Musian's hand with her slender hand and smiled, you changed your mind and planned to give up Miss Bai and come to me. Musian shook his head reservedly and said, Miss Huang, I came to you for something important. Don't do this. If Huang Manting was not familiar with Musian last time, she would probably have been fooled. Seeing his restraint now, she couldn't help but think of the previous time in the Dawn Chamber of Commerce, when the other party used this method to play hard to get, and she couldn't help but narrow her eyes slightly. She lifted up one of her legs, holding a teacup, her eyes full of charm, and sighed faintly, "Mr. Mew, you came to see me, it shouldn't be to show off your acting skills." She tilted her head and looked over shyly, bit her lips, and said softly, "A moment of spring night is worth 1,000 gold, Mr. Mew." When she said this, her fingertips touched the lapels, and a touch of snow white seemed to emerge faintly. Muzian took a quick look and then shook his head gently, "Miss Huang, I already have Ruoxi, I can't let her down." After saying that, he moved his eyes away, fully demonstrating what it means to be a gentleman and not look at things that are not appropriate. But this reaction aroused Huang Manting's inner desire to win. She held her cheek with her hand and said with a smile, "Mr. Mew always comes to see me with a purpose. Last time, you invited me to chat late at night but were rejected. This time, you came to me not just for chatting, right?" However, she changed her tone and said, "Before Mr. Mew explains his purpose, I want to know why you helped me obtain the inheritance of luck that day. Also, how did you know the real way to obtain the inheritance of luck?" If Muzian had not told her not to inject spiritual energy into the stone tablet at that time, she might have done so, and in that case, her final result might be the same as Gong Sun Cheng, and she would faint due to the exhaustion of spiritual energy, and then be sent out of the cave of the spirit dragon. It is impossible for her to obtain the inheritance of the spirit dragon. "I made it up, if I don't tell you this, how can I give you a favor?" Muzian kept a calm smile, "This is a secret. As for why I helped, I had an agreement with Uncle Huang before, I am just fulfilling this promise." Huang Manting seemed a little surprised, and couldn't help but look at Muzian for a few more times. Soon, a slight arc appeared at the corner of her mouth, and she smiled softly, "Mr. Mew is really a gentleman who keeps his promises." In her impression before, Muzian was a guy who liked to calculate people's hearts, but she never thought that the other party was a man who valued his promises. Just because of the promise made at the Dawn Chamber of Commerce that day, he gave her the immortal fate of the inheritance of luck. This is not something a petty person can do. After all, this is the inheritance of luck. How many people want to get the great opportunity? Staring at Muzian's handsome profile, Huang Manting took a sip of tea to moisten her lips, and said faintly, "The third prince secretly sent someone to investigate you." Muzian showed a surprised look, looked at Huang Manting, and asked puzzledly, "Why is he investigating my affairs?" Huang Manting chuckled, "He is a very vengeful person. You had some conflicts with him before, right? So he naturally wants to retaliate now. He even told you this kind of thing, it seems that he trusts you very much." Muzian smiled. Huang Manting played with a strand of hair and said softly, "He mentioned you by chance before and told me not to get too close to you. But, sometimes love is something you can't control." She put the teacup in her hand against Muzian's lips and smiled charmingly, "What do you think, Mr. Mew?" Muzian took a sip of tea and sighed, "Miss Huang, I really didn't come to you for this kind of thing. It doesn't matter, we can finish talking about business and then talk about romance." Huang Manting smiled. "The third prince would be sad if he saw it," Muzian said. "Heh." Miss Huang's mouth drew a disdainful arc and chuckled, "What does his sadness have to do with me? If it was the prince, no, if it was the eldest princess, she would consider it. The Dawn Chamber of Commerce has branches all over Dongzhou. Huang Manting doesn't lack any material things at all. She just wants spiritual satisfaction. A dog licker cannot give the goddess spiritual satisfaction. But speaking of it, it seems that there is a deputy chief behind the third prince," Huang Manting added. "Mr. Mew should be careful." Muzian's expression did not change much. He had heard Lan Murian remind him of this before, so he knew it naturally. "Mr. Mew, do you really not consider staying here tonight?" Huang Manting raised her head and stared at Muzian with her eyes full of love, and changed the subject. Musian shook her head helplessly. Miss Huang, I'm really not that kind of person. Mainly because she accompanied by Ruoxi to make love several times today, Musian has now temporarily entered the sage mode. And if she really accepted Huang Manting's request, she would probably be ruthlessly abandoned after a while when she got tired of playing. This woman is so enthusiastic about him now, purely because he is the one Huang Manting can't get. If she really gets it, she won't cherish it so much. In short, Musian is the one fishing, and Huang Manting is the fish in the water. And now, the fish in the water invites Musian to go in the water. But what Musian wants is to catch the fish on the shore. Huang Manting looked at Musian's indifferent eyes, bit her lip, and was about to cry, Mr. Mu is so cruel. I still plan to firmly refuse to provide your information to the third prince. Unexpectedly, Musian turned his head to look at her and smiled, whatever the third prince asks you, just tell him everything you know. Tell him the information about me and Ruoxi truthfully. Huang Manting looked at Musian with doubts. Seeing that he was not joking, she couldn't help asking, why? Musian showed a faint smile, you will know later. Why don't you tell me now? Otherwise, why should I listen to you? Or stay and chat with me at night? She gently pulled the corner of Musian's clothes and raised her moist eyes. Musian shook his head modestly and said, next time, definitely next time. Huang Manting stared at Musian's serious expression silently, feeling that she could not see Musian clearly. According to the original investigation information, Musian should be a person who likes beauty, but tonight she tempted him so much, but he still didn't bite the bait. How could a normal man refuse her? Finally, Huang Manting sighed faintly, for the sake of the inheritance of luck, I will help you, but next time, Mr. Mu has to accompany me well. But, Mr. Mu is so sure that the third prince will come to me to ask for information about you, she asked again. He will come, Musian said firmly. Men like to show off in front of the woman they like the most. If he wants to show how hard his fist is in front of Miss Huang, this is a rare opportunity, how could he miss it? After watching Musian leave, Huang Manting took a sip of tea, and then noticed a burst of hot breath coming from beside her. She lowered her eyes, looked at the pretty female disciple kneeling at her feet, and said softly, my feet are a little sore, help me massage them. After that, she retracted her gaze, playing with a strand of hair with her fingertips, but secretly thinking about what Musian said tonight. Tell the third prince about him truthfully. Isn't this just handing a knife to someone else? What does Musian want to do? And, is he so sure that the third prince will come to see him? After about an incense stick of time, a female disciple suddenly hurried in outside the house. She first looked at the girl kneeling at Huang Manting's feet with envy, and then looked at Huang Manting and said, Master, the third prince is outside asking for an audience. He really came. Huang Manting's eyes flashed slightly, and then a very beautiful arc was drawn at the corner of her mouth. Please let him in. Forget it, anyway, we will soon know what Master Mu wants to do, right? As for who to help, it was actually very clear from the beginning. They belonged to Tianqian City, so it was only right for them to help each other. The third prince obviously did not expect that the goddess he pursued was pursuing another man behind his back. At the same time, Musian returned to the villa, opened the door of Miss Bai's room, and lay leisurely on the bed, leaning on Bai Ruoxi's thighs. Looking at the beauty who had already started to meditate and practice, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes comfortably, smelling the fragrance on her body and feeling the beauty of the facial cleanser. All that should be done has been done, and the only thing left is to return the 8 treasure cranes to the head of Canghai Peak. This must be done early, so as not to be eaten up by Miss Ling Long. Then, you can watch the enemy's performance. Compare the backstage, who doesn't have it? So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 120. The next morning. Canghai Peak. At this time, Yi Hao was sitting in a villa, seemingly absent-minded. He is the current leader of Kanghai Peak, a 5th-level void returner, and is also a well-known figure outside. Of course, even within the Lianji sect, Yi Hao's strength ranks high. But unfortunately, there is a master above Yi Hao. Although that master rarely came forward to deal with matters at Kanghai Feng, Yi Hao would inevitably be somewhat restrained by this master when dealing with various matters. For example, this was the case with the previous sect assessment at Kanghai Peak. If Muzian hadn't appeared at that time, all the disciples participating in the sect's assessment would have been wiped out. At this time, a disciple flew into the hall, clasped his fists and said, "First seat, there is a disciple outside who calls himself Muzian, asking to see him." Yi Hao, who was drinking sake, looked up instantly, with a hint of joy on his face, but he hid it well, and said, "Invite him in." The disciple glanced at Yi Hao doubtfully, then nodded slightly. This was the first time he saw the leader showing such an expectant look, which was really rare. Not long after, the disciple led Muzian into the villa, and then quietly retreated. First seat. Seeing this middle-aged man coming into view, Muzian clasped his fists respectfully. "Little friend Mu, sit over here." Yi Hao gestured to the seat opposite with a smile on his face. After he took his seat, the leader of Kanghai Peak looked calm and calm. He picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. He smiled and said, "Why did Mu Xiao come to see me this time?" Although he seemed calm and calm, his slightly aged eyes were always looking at Muzian, as if waiting for something. What would his reaction be if I told him that the 8 treasure cranes were eaten by the spirit dragon? Muzian smiled and took out a NA ring, and then waved his hand. In the NA ring, there were more than a dozen 8 treasure cranes. Appeared quietly aside. The wings of each 8 treasure crane are quietly bound by a layer of aperture, preventing them from moving at all. Looking at the leader with excitement on his face, Muzian still maintained a respectful attitude and said, "Senior Linglong ate another 8 treasure crane at some point, and I was worried that she couldn't control it, so came here early." Yi Hao nodded slightly, and when he raised his head again to look at Muzian, there was a little more sincere gratitude in his eyes, but he still said in a calm tone, "Senior Linglong is the sacred beast of our Lianji section. If she wants to eat it, no matter how much." He paused and continued, "I'm really troubling you this time, little friend Mu. As agreed, you can take one of these 8 treasure cranes with you. If you eat it, it will also be of great benefit to your future practice." "Thank you, Senior," Muzian said, cupping his fists. "No need to thank you, you deserve this." When Yi Hao said this, he shook his head and sighed, "I didn't expect that there would be time to ask for help from my juniors." When he said this, he looked at Muzian again and said with a smile, "No matter what, it is thanks to Mu Xiao this time. Apart from anything else, there is still some energy in Lianji section. If you have any questions, you can discuss it with me, which can be regarded as repaying my help this time. It is the juniors' honor to be able to work for the seniors," Muzian said respectfully. "As for the polite words, you still have to say them. Some kind words, even if the other party knows they are polite words, will still be very useful." Yi Hao smiled and nodded, then secretly looked at Muzian a few times, and sighed with regret in his heart. He could naturally see that Muzian's talent was still very good. If it had happened in the past, he could have been accepted as an inner disciple this time. But this time, something is different. This time the sex assessment can be called a golden age. There are too many geniuses. There is only one spot for inner disciples. If possible, it would be best to choose Bairu Oxi or Ye Lingxian. Even if these 2 people were selected by the first 2 main peaks that won the last sect competition, there would also be Wei Mengru, and even Huang Manting and others. Although it is a bit regretful, the quota of inner disciples still needs to be carefully considered. Boom! Suddenly there was a loud rumbling sound in the sky. Musian subconsciously looked up and saw that there seemed to be a lot of calamity clouds vaguely gathering on the top of Kanghai Peak. Amidst the rolling thunder, branch-shaped lightning flashed across. Has someone been promoted to refining God? Musian subconsciously asked. This is an elixir, Yi Hao said with a smile. It seems that someone on Kanghai Peak refined a good 4th grade elixir today. No, Yi Hao's eyes narrowed slightly and he continued, looking at this calamity cloud, I'm afraid it's very close to the 5th level. Alchemy, this is my knowledge blind spot. Musian looked at Yi Hao, who seemed to be thinking about something, stood up and said goodbye, leaving the garden. When passing the top of Kanghai Peak, he vaguely saw a lot of disciples gathered not far ahead. These disciples all raised their heads to look at someone on the high platform and whispered something in a low voice. There are occasionally such alchemy competitions on the major peaks, but like today, it is quite rare to see someone refining a 5th grade elixir, or even an elixir competition that triggers thunder tribulation. Musian walked in quietly, and then looked up at the platform. He saw Yayu, who was wearing a black robe, standing proudly in front of the platform, enjoying the attention of the crowd. In his hand, there was a newly refined 5th grade elixir, the Jade Beauty Pill. The so-called Jade Beauty Pill, to put it bluntly, can keep one's youth for several years after taking it. It may not mean much to men, but for women, the value of this Jade Beauty Pill is quite huge. Fellow deist, yes, alchemy skills are perfect, and I am convinced of my defeat. Not far from Yayu, a young cultivator clasped his fists and sighed. Yayu arched his hands and smiled. Fellow deist's alchemy skills are actually not bad, but he lacks some heat, and he is just one step behind. Mr. Ye, can you sell this Jade Beauty Pill to me? I am willing to pay 5,000 spirit stones for it. A female cultivator's voice suddenly came from the audience. I'm willing to pay 8,000 spirit stones. I'll pay 10,000. Yayu listened to the bids of the female cultivators below the stage, and noticed that people looked at him with a bit of admiration in their eyes. Although he was secretly happy in his heart, his face remained calm. At this moment, he suddenly felt a familiar gaze. Looking in the direction of that gaze, at the back of the crowd, a young man in a luxurious robe was standing at the end of the crowd looking at him. Musian. Yayu's face sank, staring at the young man who was stretching his waist and was about to go back, and suddenly said, Master Mu, since you are here, do you want to compete with me in alchemy? As this voice fell, many cultivators in the crowd looked at Musian, who was about to leave. After that, there were more whispers in the crowd. The people present were all new disciples who had just joined the section. They had all heard about the conflicts between Musian and Yayu in Tianxian City. However, judging from Yayu's undisguised hatred, it seemed that the hatred between them was quite big. Musian was about to leave when he stopped. He turned his head to look at Yayu, who was standing on the high platform holding the Jade Beauty Pill, and said with a smile, Young master, yes, alchemy level is superior to his peers. I am ashamed of myself. You dare not, Yayu challenged. Then, his face was slightly clear, and he said, I almost forgot that you are not an alchemist. Sorry, I was abrupt. Musian smiled and nodded, and took out a jade bottle from the ring. Yayu's eyes then froze on the word Ye on the jade screen. The pills that Ye Lingxian gave to Musian at that time. The pills that Sister Lingxian gave are very useful, Musian said in a voice transmission. Yayu's eyes suddenly became sharper, and there was a little more anger in his eyes. It's okay that Musian used some sweet words to cheat Lingxian of the elixir that day, but now he has the nerve to show off with it in his hand. How dare he be so self-righteous while eating gigolo? Yayu opened his mouth slightly and was about to speak. At this time, under the cliff of Kanghai Peak, a golden light column shot up into the sky, and a strong smell of medicine filled the entire peak of Kanghai Peak. Musian subconsciously turned his head and looked towards the depths of the cliff in the direction of the light column. He seemed to see a girl in a light purple dress standing in the light. And the strong smell of medicine just now came from her. Lingxuan's retreat is over.